Chapter 471. I'll go back and take a look. If Yang Tian's talent in runes is indeed outstanding, I'll keep him here. With that, Great Priest Tai Yu stood up and disappeared in a flash. When Great Priest Tai Yu reappeared, he was already back in the Great Universe Palace. He was in a room that was decorated like a study. In this room, there was a crystal ball with a diameter of 1 meter. The crystal ball was covered in runes, and Yang Tian's current situation was displayed in the crystal ball. Great Priest Tai Yu nodded with a smile when he saw the three-dimensional image displayed in the crystal ball. The strange program had already been transferred to Yang Tian's brain and was controlling Yang Tian's hands, constantly changing hand gestures. It was just like the space within the meteorite that Great Priest Feiyun had carved out. Yang Tian cooperated with the strange program and formed runes with his hand gestures, emitting waves of runic energy. This was a method of investigation. Great Priest Tai Yu was pleasantly surprised to see that Yang Tian could actually form runes with his hands and generate runic energy. No less than 1,000 cultivators had come to participate in the test of runic mechanisms he'd set up, but no one had ever used such a simple yet complicated method to crack them. Simple meant that one didn't use any tools and only relied on one's own hands. Complicated meant that this method of cracking the runes required an extremely powerful calculation ability. Even High Priest Tai Yu would find it difficult to make such precise movements with his hands and fingers in order to activate the power of the runes. If Great Priest Tai Yu was trapped in such a runic array, he would have taken out the runic tools he'd prepared beforehand to perform calculations. Waves of runic energy were emitted from the crystal ball. Great Priest Tai Yu could sense that the runic energy emitted from Yang Tian's hands was both powerful and stable. Great Priest Tai Yu nodded as he sensed the energy. Whoosh! Suddenly, the sound of wind could be heard. Great Priest Empty God appeared next to Great Priest Tai Yu. Then, several more sounds of wind could be heard. The other 35 great priests in the Labyrinth Palace arrived one after another. Fortunately, Great Priest Tai Yu's room was large enough that it didn't seem crowded even with 36 people. Great Priest Tai Yu wasn't surprised by the arrival of the other great priests. He was still smiling. If Yang Tian knew that the top 36 great priests of the Superstar Divinity Temple were paying attention to him, he would definitely be very surprised. Everyone looked at the crystal ball. Other than High Priest Tai Yu, none of them were proficient in runes, but they still had some insight and naturally knew that Yang Tian's ability was extraordinary. Can you pass the test you set up? Everyone quietly looked at the crystal ball. A moment later, High Priest Kaya asked. High Priest Tai Yu shook his head. I don't know yet. Despite his words, Great Priest Tai Yu couldn't hide the excitement in his eyes. He looked at Yang Tian as if he was looking at a treasure. Tai Yu, look at his armor. Did you design the runes on it? Great Priest Mei Chun was the most observant. At the same time, his memory was also very good. Although a long time had passed, he still found Yang Tian's armor extremely familiar. At the mention of this matter, a great shaman said, Yang Tian used that corpse to exchange for this armor in the academy. Great Priest Tai Yu immediately enlarged Yang Tian's image and looked at it carefully. He nodded and said, Yes, this is the armor I designed. However, the runes on it have been modified. Great Priest Tai Yu's words were very shocking. After all, Great Priest Tai Yu would never take out something he designed unless it was to his satisfaction. However, someone was actually able to find a flaw in it and modify it. Could it be that Yang Tian's attainments in runes were even greater than Great Priest Tai Yu's? High Priest Tai Yu used his finger to tap on the crystal ball dozens of times. In the crystal ball, the armor on Yang Tian's body was removed and displayed on a flat surface. This way, the image was much more direct. Great Priest Tai Yu furrowed his brows and carefully looked at the runes on the armor. His brows furrowed even tighter. Everyone looked at Great Priest Tai Yu's expression. How is it? Great Priest Empty God couldn't help but ask curiously. Great Priest Tai Yu nodded. The degree of modification isn't very big. The runes on the armor haven't changed much. Only a few energy lines have been added. However, it's these energy lines that have increased the armor's defensive power by at least 2 times. I didn't expect that modifying the energy lines would produce such a result. Great Priest Tai Yu suddenly laughed at the end of his words. He seemed very happy as he said, Yang Tian, I must keep him in the temple. Has he already surpassed you? That's impossible. Great Priest Haiyu's words left one of the great priests astonished. Great Priest Haiyu said, No, the runes on this armor are my work from a very long time ago. If I were to modify them now, they'd be even more perfect. After saying that, Great Priest Haiyu had the crystal ball show Yang Tian again. He then tapped on the crystal ball a few times and said, I'll have to increase the difficulty for him. The crystal ball was like a controller for a rune array. It was the hub of the rune array mechanism designed by Great Priest Haiyu. When he made a change here, Yang Tian, who was trapped by the rune array, immediately received a notification from the rune program. Yang Tian couldn't help but furrow his brows and stop. This was because the strange program told Yang Tian that the rune array had changed and that his previous calculations had been in vain. Now, he had to redesign it, and it would take a long time. Yang Tian had no choice but to sit on the ground and lie down. Under these circumstances, the little blue dragon didn't dare to stray too far from Yang Tian. As soon as Yang Tian sat down, it jumped to the ground and looked around. Although it had devoured Great Priest Fiyun's strange rune book, some runes were useless to it. However, the spatial rune array designed by Great Priest Haiyu was clearly different. This made the little blue dragon feel very helpless. Xiaolong, once we get out of here, we'll go find Great Priest Kaya and ask him where the Dragon Starfield is. At that time, I'll be able to take you home. After lying down, Yang Tian rested his head on his hands and looked at the vast expanse of white above him. Yang Tian spoke in the Mandarin of Earth. Cheep cheep, the little blue dragon cried out happily. After arriving at the Superstar Divine Temple, the little blue dragon was very excited because it had the opportunity to meet Great Priest Kaya. Its intuition told it that it would get an answer very soon. What is Yang Tian saying? Great Priest Haiyu asked with a frown when he saw Yang Tian lying down. He didn't understand what Yang Tian was saying. Great Priest Kaya smiled and said, He wants to see me and ask me some questions. Chapter 472. High Priest Kaya already knew the question Yang Tian wanted to ask. When High Priest Kaya thought of the question Yang Tian wanted to ask him, he recalled a beautiful and mystical star field he encountered when he was traveling the universe a long time ago. That star field was rather peculiar because both the stars and the planets were more than 10 times larger than ordinary planets. Of course, the gravitational force of these planets, as well as the entire star field formed by these planets, was also extremely powerful. When High Priest Kaya discovered that star field and was about to enter, he was stopped by a powerful person. That person's power was extremely terrifying. Even the current High Priest, Empty God, couldn't compare to him. That person only blew at High Priest Kaya, and High Priest Kaya's body flew back uncontrollably. At that time, High Priest Kaya only felt the world spin. He couldn't see any light in his eyes. It was pitch black. When High Priest Kaya woke up, he was shocked to find that he had been blown hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. High Priest Kaya would always record the coordinates of the star map in detail whenever he went to a place. Although he was blown far away from that star field, High Priest Kaya still followed the coordinates on the star map and went there again. He wanted to see what was in that star field. However, when he went there for the second time, he found that the mysterious star field had disappeared. It wasn't in its original position. It was as if the dozens of stars, tens of thousands of planets, and countless meteorites in the star field had been moved away by someone. This shocked High Priest Kaya. This was the strangest thing he had encountered in his travels. Although the star field that originally existed in this part of the universe had disappeared, High Priest Kaya didn't give up. He tried his best to find it nearby. Hard work paid off. Several years later, the mysterious star field appeared again. This time, High Priest Kaya saw many star beasts. They were what humans on Earth called dragons. The huge planets in the star field all had different colors. Some were gold, some were green, some were blue, and some were black. Star beasts of all colors lived on planets of corresponding colors. Through the use of high-tech equipment, High Priest Kaya captured many scenes of star beasts playing and fighting in space. In this star field, the powerful star beasts didn't live in harmony. There would be fights between the different races. In the end, High Priest Kaya was also surprised to find that the powerful star beasts in this star field could actually transform into humans and live like humans. Not only that, there were more than one type of beasts in this star field. There were also giant green birds, white exotic beasts with long fur, sharp teeth, and 4 powerful claws. High Priest Kaya was like a peeping Tom as he stayed outside of this star field for a long time. Just as he was about to enter this star field again, he was discovered by a star beast that had transformed into a human. High Priest Kaya wasn't blown away. Instead, he was sent flying with a slap. Boom! Even now, every time High Priest Kaya thought of the situation back then, a loud sound would echo in his ears. The one to send him to the star field to him. This time, when High Priest Kaya woke up, he discovered that he was even further away from the star field. When he woke up, he heard a warning: do not come to the Dragon Starfield again. Otherwise, you will be killed. From then on, High Priest Kaya never went to that star field again. When he heard Yang Tian mention the Dragon Starfield, High Priest Kaya's memories that had been sealed away for a long time appeared in his mind. After lying on the ground for a while, Yang Tian got up from the ground after strange programming finished its inspection program. High Priest Tai, you had already set the difficulty of deciphering the talisman array to the highest level. Even if High Priest Tai you were to decipher it himself, it would still take him a long time. The other high priests looked at the image in the crystal ball curiously. They were all very patient people. Since they were here to observe Yang Tian, it was only natural that they would only leave after watching the entire process. And so, they waited with Yang Tian for more than an hour. Those who cultivated in runes had powerful memories as well. High Priest Tai, you could see that Yang Tian's hand gestures were very different from before. Rings of runic energy spread out from Yang Tian's hands once more. Just like last time, the runic energy lines that enveloped this space appeared in Yang Tian's mind. They were very dense. When a strange program simulated the scene in Yang Tian's mind, Yang Tian felt as if he were wrapped in a large, colorful cocoon. Countless spatial energy lines stacked on top of each other without the slightest gap between them. Whether it was above his head, on the ground, or all around him, they were everywhere. Now that he had figured it out, the next step was to decipher it. The deciphering method was the same as last time. Moreover, the strange program told Yang Tian that he only needed to modify the previous deciphering procedure. This would save him a lot of time. While the strange program was calculating and designing a deciphering procedure for this space, Yang Tian began to walk around casually. From time to time, he would crouch down and touch the ground. Seeing Yang Tian's actions, the high priest asked, "What is he doing?" "High Priest Taiyu replied, "He is touching the runic energy lines." There was no need for a detailed explanation. Everyone understood what was going on. If he could sense the runic energy lines of a runic array, it meant that it wouldn't be long before the array would be deciphered. He's very powerful. I can't believe that he has such high attainments in the Tao of Runes at such a young age. High Priest Taiyu muttered to himself after a while. Before High Priest Taiyu could finish, Kaya interrupted. "I think he's using some kind of tool. Wasn't Feiyun found by Yang Tian? Perhaps he found some kind of runic tool among the things Feiyun left behind." However, High Priest Taiyu shook his head. That's even more impossible. Even High Priest Feiyun wouldn't have been able to decipher this runic array so easily. It doesn't seem like he's using any kind of runic tool. At least, I didn't see any. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. High Priest Yu Chun suddenly said, "Yang Tian is the only person I've met who will change it the most in the future. No matter how we calculate, we can't predict his future. Just like last time, we deduced that he would go to 9 Barbarian Galaxy. In the end, after he went through the test, his future changed." High Priest Empty God stared at the image on the crystal ball and asked with a frown, "How did that happen?" The predictions of the two of you prophets were very accurate, including the arrival of the goddess. We will get what we want. High Priest Yuchin shook his head and smiled wryly. The future is ever-changing. Everything we do, including our calculations, will unknowingly change the future. Chapter 473. Since the original cracking program had been modified, it didn't take too long to design a cracking program. Soon, the strange program finished designing the cracking program. In the eyes of the high priests, Yang Tian suddenly calmed down and slowly raised his hands. Then, Yang Tian clasped his hands together and shouted, "Rise!" His palms and fingers started moving at high speed. Sometimes his palms were facing each other, and sometimes they were separated. His fingers were flexed and extended. This kind of movement was full of rhythm and was very beautiful. As Yang Tian's hands kept changing positions, forming all kinds of gestures, waves of energy were emitted from his hands. Just like when he cracked the rune mechanism set up by High Priest Flying Cloud, the rune energy released by Yang Tian's hands turned into threads. These threads quickly spread out in all directions with Yang Tian as the center. Yang Tian's eyes were showing the scenes simulated by the strange program, allowing him to see the entire process clearly. The energy threads emitted from his hands quickly attached themselves to the energy threads that formed the rune array. Of course, these threads were just visual effects designed by the strange program for Yang Tian's convenience. The actual situation wasn't like that at all. The formless energy threads that formed the spatial rune array were replaced by the rune energy threads emitted by Yang Tian. At the same time, High Priest Taiyu discovered that the crystal ball had started shaking and couldn't help but be shocked. Seeing the expression on High Priest Taiyu's face, High Priest Empty God asked, "What's the matter?" High Priest Taiyu bitterly smiled and said, "If I didn't cut off the connection with the rune array, this rune tool would have been destroyed." If Yang Tian was here at this moment, with the help of the strange program, he would be able to see countless energy lines being released from the crystal ball, extending all the way to the outside of the room. They looked just like wires. The rune energy released by Yang Tian's hands was very likely to follow these energy threads and invade the crystal ball. Although it was only a possibility, High Priest Taiyu still waved his hand and cut off the connection between the crystal ball and the spatial rune array. As soon as the connection was cut, the scene in the crystal ball also disappeared. The energy lines that formed the rune array were too dense. Under the control of the rune program, Yang Tian spent about half an hour to crack the spatial rune array. Without a sound, the vast expanse of white space disappeared before Yang Tian's eyes. At this time, the real scene in the hall appeared in front of Yang Tian's eyes. This palace was very spacious. Every 10 meters or so, there would be a stone pillar, and on every stone pillar, there were runes carved on it. On the side facing the door, there were 9 statues of exotic beasts arranged in a row. One of them was actually a statue of a coiling dragon. When the little blue dragon saw the coiling dragon statue, it immediately jumped down from Yang Tian's shoulder and flew over, landing in front of the coiling dragon statue. Yang Tian immediately followed. Arriving in front of the coiling dragon sculpture, Yang Tian observed it for a moment. He didn't sense any energy fluctuations from the sculpture. Furthermore, there were no runes engraved on the sculpture. It looked like an ordinary sculpture, but it was vivid and lifelike. There were 3 doors on the left and right sides of the palace. They should lead to the rooms next door. Yang Tian wouldn't casually barge into those rooms. After looking at the coiling dragon statue, he strolled around the palace and looked at the runes on the stone pillars. These runes were very valuable to the strange program. What did you see? About half an hour later, Yang Tian finished looking at the runes on the several dozen pillars in the palace. An old man walked out of one of the doors and arrived in front of Yang Tian with a smile. These runes are all-time runes. Yang Tian had already guessed who this old man was. After a moment of silence, he answered, "These runes are all-time runes." Of course, while he was silent, he looked like he was thinking, but he was actually asking about the strange program. This old man was High Priest Taiyu, and also the master of this palace. "You are correct," High Priest Taiyu said indifferently. "However, due to the incomplete number of runes, they can't display the power of time. This old man engraved them on the pillars in hopes of changing the flow of time in this palace and giving this old man more time to study the runes." This was a good idea. Think about it. If such a space was designed, people could stay in it for years or even decades, but only a few days or even a few minutes had passed outside. What kind of situation would that be? Who knew how many powerhouses could be created in such a space-time in a short period of time? However, there was a problem with this. That was, if one stayed in a space-time where the flow of time was accelerated and then returned to a space-time where the flow of time was normal, how would the lifespan be calculated? It wasn't as simple as calculating the lifespan of a person based on how much time they had experienced. Yang Tian was silent at this time. He was really thinking. High Priest Tai Yu didn't interrupt Yang Tian's thoughts. Instead, he turned around and walked around the palace. After Yang Tian came back to his senses, he immediately followed him and asked, "Are you High Priest Tai Yu?" Although he had already guessed the old man's identity, Yang Tian still scratched his head and asked. There were many old men in the Superstar Divinity Temple. It would be very embarrassing if he got the wrong identity. High Priest Tai Yu nodded. Correct. This old man is Tai Yu. The runes on your armor were designed by this old man. Yang Tian laughed mischievously and said, "Is there a reward for passing the test?" "There's a reward." High Priest Tai Yu turned his head and said indifferently, "The Great Universe Palace will reward you with a place to cultivate. You can use this old man's resources to study runes. What do you think of this reward?" Yang Tian was very shocked after hearing High Priest Tai Yu's words. At the same time, he was pleasantly surprised, because this reward was really too great. The strange program was lacking runes information, and the Superstar Divinity Temple had the most complete rune information library in the universe. As long as the strange program could read all the runes, wouldn't it be able to crack those storage bracelets? That would be a huge fortune. Now that Yang Tian saw the runes, he couldn't help but think of this matter. "Many thanks, High Priest Tai Yu." Yang Tian was stunned for a moment before calling out in pleasant surprise, "Come with me." High Priest Tai Yu nodded with a smile and turned to walk towards the door he had come from. In Yang Tian's eyes, this old man was very amiable. However, when it came to conducting experiments, the 36 old men were very callous. During this period of time, no less than 100 cultivators had died at their hands. This was the world of the strong. Only strength could catch the attention of these top powerhouses of the universe. Xiaolong, let's go. The little blue dragon was still lying in front of the coiling dragon statue. It was somewhat entranced by the sight. Yang Tian couldn't help but remind this guy loudly. After hearing Yang Tian's voice, the little blue dragon came back to its senses and flew to Yang Tian's shoulder. Next, High Priest Tai Yu personally led Yang Tian around the entire Great Space Palace. Apart from the Great Space Palace, which was the place where Yang Tian had broken through the trials, the other places were all small rooms. Most of these rooms were filled with rune books, ancient stone tablets with runes carved on them, or fragments of other materials. Most of the rooms looked like storage rooms. After seeing so many things related to runes, Yang Tian knew that he would be spending a lot of time in these rooms in the future. Why didn't he put these things away in his storage tool? This was because apart from High Priest Tai Yu, there were also many ordinary priests and divine generals in the Great Space Palace. There were over 1,000 people living in the Great Space Palace. Of course, the people who lived in the Great Space Palace were also rune cultivators. These people also needed to flip through these books to learn. Of course, not everyone could casually flip through the books in the Great Space Palace. The hierarchy of the Superstar God Temple was very strict. Even the apprentices of the Great Space Palace were divided into ranks. Apart from High Priest Tai Yu, from top to bottom, there were priests, chief divine generals, guard captains, temple guards, and servants. Even a servant in the Superstar God Temple could learn a lot of things. The servants of the Great Space Palace were naturally able to cultivate runes as well. These people were naturally able to come into contact with more runes according to their status. The higher their status in the temple, the more runes they could come into contact with. The authority that High Priest Tai Yu had just given Yang Tian was even higher than that of ordinary priests in the Great Space Palace. After showing Yang Tian around the Great Space Palace, High Priest Yu gave Yang Tian a black token with the word Great Space engraved on it. This was equivalent to a pass in the Great Space Palace. It was engraved with runes. With this token, Yang Tian would be able to enter places that he could enter. After Yang Tian took the token and saw that High Priest Yu was about to leave, he immediately said, "High Priest, I want to see High Priest Kaya. I want to ask him a question." High Priest Yu smiled and said a string of numbers to Yang Tian. He also told Yang Tian that these were the coordinates of the Dragon Starfield. After saying that, High Priest Yu turned around and left. The 36 High Priests took the time to observe Yang Tian. On one hand, they wanted to take a break. On the other hand, they wanted to see Yang Tian in person. After all, the name Yang Tian had appeared in their ears many times. After achieving their goal, they continued to study the corpse. Yang Tian didn't expect that he would be able to obtain the coordinates of the Dragon Starfield so easily. Xiaolong, you can go home now." After being stunned for a moment, Yang Tian grabbed the small body of the little blue dragon and shouted excitedly. Squeak, squeak. The little blue dragon in Yang Tian's hand waved its 2 claws and opened its mouth to let out an excited cry. After a moment of excitement, Yang Tian took the black token that High Priest Yu gave him and started to wander around the Great Space Palace. The Great Space Palace was very big. Apart from the main palace, there were many other buildings in the surroundings. For example, there were gardens, small houses for the priests, courtyard for the servants, and so on. Yang Tian knew that he would be staying here for a long time. At the very least, he had to familiarize himself with the surroundings. Chapter 474. Yang Tian found a secluded room in the Great Universe Palace and stayed there. In the Great Universe Palace, there were many such rooms. Yang Tian chose a rather secluded place where no one lived. After choosing the room, the servants tidied up the room and moved in all kinds of furniture. The decorations were similar to the interior of the villa in the academy, filled with a high-tech flavor. In fact, in the Superstar Divine Temple, whether it was the high and mighty goddess, the various high priests, or the servants at the bottom, everyone's living conditions were not bad. That was because even an ordinary servant in the temple was a cultivator. They naturally did not lack money, and the price of all kinds of high-tech household equipment was also very cheap. Even an ordinary servant could enjoy the best living conditions. In their own homes, they could stretch out their hands for clothes and open their mouth for food. After arranging everything, Yang Tian did not use the auxiliary equipment that the servants of the temple brought over. Instead, he took out Bell from his storage bracelet. "Master, hello." The moment Bell came out, it cheerfully greeted Yang Tian. An intelligent program like Bell, of course, did not have any emotions. Instead, it purposely showed its emotional side in order to show its intelligence. This was also one of the advantages of Changneng's program, but at the same time, it was also a disadvantage. Without emotions, it was not considered a true life form. Most likely, this was also something that the scientists on Earth did not think of. They thought that after a programmed life form developed intelligence, it would be like a human, having emotions like happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy. In reality, it was not like that. "Bell, I'll leave this place to you." Yang Tian laughed. Bell understood Yang Tian's meaning. It quickly connected to all the high-tech equipment in the room. Next, as long as Yang Tian said a word, Bell would be able to serve Yang Tian just like in the Superstar Academy. At the same time, Bell did not discover the existence of any surveillance cameras. This was also what Yang Tian was worried about. With technology so advanced, even a speck of dust that could not be seen with the naked eye could be a remote surveillance device. After the residence was prepared, Yang Tian had to think of a way to meet Qin Fei frequently. Although Yang Tian was the chief divine general of the Superstar Divine Temple, his status was still a far cry from the goddesses. Unless he could become a great shaman, he would not be able to meet with Qin Fei in private. After being apart for so long, it was unbearable for the couple to not be able to see each other often. "Xiaolong, my happy life depends on you now." Yang Tian grabbed the little blue dragon from his shoulder and whispered a long sentence to the little blue dragon. When there was no one else around, Yang Tian communicated with the little blue dragon in his mother tongue. Even if ordinary people heard it, they wouldn't know what it meant. Perhaps only High Priest Kaya could understand the language of Earth. Little Blue Dragon's eyes were filled with excitement after hearing this. It felt that the task given to it by Yang Tian was very exciting. Creak, creak. After Yang Tian finished speaking, the little blue dragon excitedly cried out a few times. Yang Tian took out a piece of white paper, wrote on it, folded it into a ball, and put it into the little blue dragon's mouth. This kind of paper was used to carve runes and was not easy to damage. It was best used to transmit information. If it was placed in the little blue dragon's mouth, if it encountered any special situation, such as being discovered by those powerful great shamans, the little blue dragon could directly swallow the paper into its stomach. With a ball of paper in its mouth, the little blue dragon turned into a green shadow and disappeared in a flash. After the little blue dragon left, Yang Tian took out 2 bug brains and dozens of storage tools from the small storage cabin of the armor. After leaving the planet of the first test and returning to the spaceship, Soli returned the bug brains to Yang Tian. After looking at the dozens of storage tools, Yang Tian sighed and put them into the safe controlled by Bell. There must be a lot of good things in these storage tools, but he didn't know how long it would take to open them. After putting away the dozens of storage tools, Yang Tian began to personally make 2 pendants. This way, he could put the bug brains into the pendants, making it easy to carry around. If others saw it, they wouldn't suspect anything. The entire Superstar Divinity Temple was covered by a large and intricate glyph array. Normal people couldn't enter and leave freely. Other than the outside, some special places were also covered by glyph arrays. For example, there were glyph arrays around the Goddess Palace. After the little blue dragon flew out of the Great Universe Palace, it passed through the forest and flowers. At the same time, it hid its presence so that it would be difficult to be discovered. After more than 10 minutes, it arrived at the back of the Goddess Palace. PFFF, the little blue dragon wanted to enter the Goddess Palace through the back door, but it was suddenly blocked by an invisible energy wall and was sent flying by the invisible energy. The little blue dragon, who was blocked by the energy wall, immediately showed anger in its eyes. If it wasn't in the Superstar Divinity Temple, it would definitely transform into a giant dragon and use its huge body to ram. But this was the Superstar Divinity Temple. An ordinary priest might be able to catch it. The little blue dragon, who had matured a lot, quickly dissipated the anger in its eyes. If something alarmed the glyph array, the staff of the temple would send people to investigate. A group of temple guards quickly ran over. Sensing that someone was coming, the little blue dragon immediately hid in the flowers. The abnormality of the glyph array is probably at this position. A temple guard captain took a small crystal ball and looked at the back of the Goddess Palace and said with a frown, "It's not very obvious. It's probably caused by the beast from another temple. This kind of thing has happened many times," said a guard beside the formation leader. The guard captain looked around and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. He nodded and agreed with the guard next to him and left with the group. Entering the Goddess Palace was still a very difficult thing to do. The little blue dragon poked its head out from the flowers and looked around. It then went around the Goddess Palace and arrived at the front of the Goddess Palace. If the back didn't work, then it would have to see if there was a chance from the front. The little blue dragon had swallowed Feiyun Archpriest's miraculous glyph. If it tried a few more times or used more power to force its way through, then it might be able to pass through. But if it did that, then it would cause too much of a commotion. For the little blue dragon who liked to use power to solve problems, it was indeed a bit depressing that it couldn't force its way in. There were many guards at the front, and it seemed that the security was even tighter. In the eyes of these guards, any strange movements would be discovered by them. The little blue dragon lay on a small tree and observed for a long time. Suddenly, its eyes lit up. That was because it saw a white-robed maid walking out of the Goddess Palace. This maid looked very pure and cute. She was Qin Fei's personal maid, Larry. Larry had a tool on her and could enter and exit the Goddess Palace at will. Yang Tian wanted to see Qin Fei, and, at the same time, Qin Fei also wanted to see Yang Tian. Although not long later, the two of them would be able to meet openly and have close contact with each other again. But the two of them obviously couldn't hold it in anymore. Larry came out this time to help Qin Fei inquire about Yang Tian. The moment she appeared, many of the guards on duty gathered their gazes on Larry. In the hearts of the guards, the goddess was supreme. They could only look up to her and couldn't profane her. But the maids by the goddess' side were different. If they could marry a white-robed maid by the goddess' side, it would be a very honorable thing. Moreover, although these maids' appearances couldn't be compared to the goddess, they were also very beautiful. The guards had their eyes on these maids because these maids could be married off after serving the goddess for a period of time. Larry enjoyed the gazes of the guards very much. With a smile on her face, she quickly walked out of the range of the goddess palace's talisman array and then walked in the direction of the stargazing platform. The little blue dragon immediately followed behind Larry. Below the stargazing platform, there was a dense forest. A guard in black armor was already waiting here. Looking at the diamond-shaped thing on the guard's abdomen that looked like a belt buckle, one could tell that he was a guard captain. This person seemed to be in a hurry as he walked back and forth in the forest. From time to time, he would glance at 3 small stones under a tree. The 3 finger-sized stones were placed in a triangle. This was Larry's way of showing that she wanted to see him. The temple's rules were very strict. If anyone was caught having an affair with the goddess maids and passing on information, they would be severely punished. When he saw Larry looking around and carefully appearing, the guard finally let out a sigh of relief and took off his helmet. After taking off his helmet, one could see that this guard had a head of light golden hair and an extremely handsome face. Larry was actually quite fond of this guard, so he quickly walked up to him. "Larry, you're finally here." The guard held the helmet and looked at Larry's beautiful face with a mischievous smile. "Kayas, I'm sorry I'm late," Larry said in an apologetic tone. The little blue dragon was hiding in a tree. Seeing this scene, he thought to himself, so this woman came here to secretly meet someone. "Larry, this is the last time I'll help you." Kayas stared at Larry for a moment and finally said helplessly, "Were you discovered?" Larry asked with his eyes wide open. Kayas shook her head. "If I was discovered, I wouldn't have come here. It's like this. Something happened to my family, and I have to resign from my position in the temple. Larry, are you willing to leave with me?" Facing this sudden question, Larry didn't know how to answer for a moment. This was actually a kind of confession. If Larry agreed, he could still leave the temple. This was because in the temple, although the white-robed maids were the goddess maids, their status was very low. It was only under the light of the goddess that they seemed very special. In this universe, the number of women who wanted to become white-robed maids could be described with the word countless. Chapter 475. Larry, you don't like me? Kayas asked dejectedly when he saw Larry's hesitation. "No, Kayas," Larry shook his head. "I do like you, but the goddess needs me. You all think she's high and mighty, but in reality, she doesn't have any freedom at all. When the goddess doesn't need me anymore." Larry lowered his head when he said that. Kayas immediately understood what Larry meant. He was stunned for a moment before joy appeared on his face. He said excitedly, "Larry, I'll wait for you." "Okay." Larry nodded. Seeing that Larry had agreed, Kayas raised her arms and wanted to hug Larry. However, his movements were stiff and hesitant. Larry couldn't help but laugh when he saw how clumsy Kayas was. He took the initiative to hug Kayas. The two hugged and only separated after a few minutes. The little blue dragon looked at all of this curiously and thought, "Why aren't they kissing?" When Yang Tian and Qin Fei were together, they would always kiss. The little blue dragon shook his head when he thought of this and felt that it wasn't right for him to think that way. "Kayas, the goddess wants to know about Yang Tian's current situation," Larry immediately said after the two separated. Kayas said, after he successfully deciphered Grand Priest Taiyu's glyph array, he was placed in the Grand Universe Palace. "I heard that he has a very high position in the Grand Universe Palace. Some of the priests in the Grand Universe Palace are very envious of him. There's no need for the goddess to worry." After saying that, Kayas frowned and raised his left wrist. A circular glyph lit up on his vambrace. I have to return immediately. The Divine General is looking for me, Kayas said helplessly. Then you can go. Larry smiled. Okay. Kayas nodded and turned around to walk out of the forest. The direction he walked was different from the direction Larry came from. Kayas had only taken a few steps when Larry called out to him. Kayas immediately stopped and turned around to look at Larry with a smile. Larry gritted his teeth and leaped into Kayas' embrace. He stood on his tiptoes and kissed Kayas on the lips. To Larry, this was the boldest thing he had ever done in his life. This was because, according to the rules of the temple, white-robed maids were not allowed to have any skin contact with men. Kayas was shocked and agitated by Larry's actions. However, he had no choice but to leave. In the eyes of the little blue dragon, the pair of lovers finally separated. After Kayas left, Larry picked up the 3 pebbles at the foot of the tree and kept them forever. After that, Larry never saw Kayas again. Only after a long time did she receive news that Kayas' family had been destroyed. As for Larry, she had never married. The universe was vast, and such sad stories were happening all the time. After Larry put away the stones, he prepared to leave the forest and tell Qin Fei the news he received. The little blue dragon knew that his chance had come. He could not force his way in. If he wanted to see Qin Fei, he could only go through this maid called Larry. Just as Larry was about to walk out of the forest, a green shadow flashed and a cute astral beast appeared in front of her. Cheep cheep. The little blue dragon hovered in the air and called out to Larry, trying to make himself look cute. Larry had seen the little blue dragon before. This little blue dragon was still in the goddess' embrace. Larry remembered the little blue dragon's name from Qin Fei and called out with wide eyes, "Little dragon." Cheep cheep. The little blue dragon replied with 2 childish noises and then leaped into Larry's embrace. Of course, Larry would not reject such a cute little guy. She also did not notice the little blue dragon rubbing its head against her towering breasts. Looking at the little blue dragon in her embrace, Larry raised her head and looked around. She thought that Yang Tian was here. After discovering that Yang Tian did not come, Larry sighed in relief. She also understood that the little blue dragon was here to scout. Xiaolong, I know what you want to do, but I can't let you go back like this. You can hide here with me. Larry thought for a while and said helplessly while pointing at her chest. After saying that, her cheeks turned red. Although it was only an astral beast, Larry was still embarrassed. Because she thought about it, she could only let the little blue dragon hide here so that it would not be noticed. Even if the guards found out that this place was a little bigger, they would not have the guts to search this place. The little blue dragon did not mind this kind of hiding place. Its body nimbly squeezed into Larry's breasts. For the little blue dragon, this was a good place to hide. Although the space was a little narrow, it was very comfortable, soft, and had a nice smell. Seeing the little blue dragon poke its head out, Larry immediately pressed the little blue dragon's head back in and pulled up her collar before walking out of the forest. If she walked around outside like this, she would be suspected. Larry strolled around nearby for more than an hour and picked some fresh fruits and flowers. She put them in a basket from her storage bracelet and returned to the goddess palace. It was not the first time that Larry brought illegal things to Qin Fei, so she was very calm on the way back. With Larry's help, the little blue dragon successfully entered the goddess palace and was brought to Qin Fei by Larry. Larry, is there any news about Yang Tian? Qin Fei saw that Larry had returned and asked anxiously before Larry could speak. Larry's cheeks turned red again. Cheep cheep. Hearing Qin Fei's voice, the little blue dragon poked its head out from between Larry's breasts and pushed open Larry's collar. After seeing Qin Fei, it happily called out twice. Seeing the little blue dragon hiding between Larry's breasts, Qin Fei could not help but smile. Larry embarrassedly lifted the little blue dragon's head and pulled it out. He threw it into the air and immediately covered his collar. The little blue dragon flew around in the air and landed on Qin Fei's shoulder before opening its mouth. Seeing the ball of paper in the little blue dragon's mouth, Qin Fei immediately took the paper from the little blue dragon's mouth and slowly unfolded it. The paper was full of Chinese characters. Yang Tian first described his longing for Soli, then explained that he was absolutely not interested in other women and that Soli was just his pure good friend. After saying this, Yang Tian told Qin Fei the serial number of the temple storage box and asked Qin Fei if she had any way to find the chip. During her time in the temple, Qin Fei also wanted to find Earth's interstellar coordinates in the temple, but she had no clue at all. There was a lot of information stored in the Superstar Temple. Some important information was even guarded by special guards. Even with her identity as a goddess, she could not casually enter and leave these places. In fact, even if she could pass through them unimpeded, it would be very difficult to find them in the vast database without any purpose. With the serial number of the storage box, it would be much easier. After reading the contents of the paper, Qin Fei crumpled the paper into a ball and used energy to turn it into a pile of ashes. Qin Fei's memory had also become very powerful as her realm increased. With just a glance, she had memorized the long serial number of the storage box. Larry had already retreated to the door to prevent anyone from breaking in. This had almost become her habitual behavior. Qin Fei glanced at the door. Seeing that Larry was guarding, she took out a pen and paper to write a reply to Yang Tian. There were some words of love written on it. At the end, it said that she would be able to meet Yang Tian very soon. However, it would be in the hall in front of everyone. As for the chip that stored Earth's coordinates, she would think of a way. After writing, Qin Fei folded the paper and put it into the little blue dragon's mouth. After doing this, Qin Fei called Larry in. The little blue dragon hid in Larry's arms again and was brought out of the goddess palace by Larry. In the great universe palace, after the little blue dragon left, Yang Tian took out various tools and some metals. In about an hour, he made a blue metal ball that could wrap the insect brain. There were even dragon patterns carved on it. In terms of carving, Yang Tian did not have much talent. However, he had great strength and stable hands. The things he made were similar to the strange program that appeared in his mind. After it was done, Yang Tian separated the complete metal ball. It was empty. Yang Tian put an insect brain in it. The size was just right. Next, he started making another one. Yang Tian also used this kind of thing to pass the time. After the little blue dragon left, his heart was filled with anticipation. Contacting Qin Fei in this kind of environment, Yang Tian had to admit that he felt like he was having an affair. Squeak, squeak. Before the second metal ball to hold the insect brain was ready, the little blue dragon's cry suddenly sounded. Immediately after, a green shadow flashed, and the little blue dragon appeared on the table in front of Yang Tian. Xiaolong, did the operation go smoothly? Yang Tian looked at the little blue dragon and asked excitedly. The little blue dragon opened its mouth and spat out a ball of paper. Yang Tian did not delve into how the little blue dragon made a sound with something in its mouth. He immediately unfolded the paper. After reading the content, Yang Tian was very happy. He knew that Qin Fei was no longer angry at him, and that the two of them would be able to meet again soon. Squeak, squeak, squeak. Next, the little blue dragon told Yang Tian that the goddess palace was covered by a talisman formation and how it had cleverly entered. Ha. Hearing that the little blue dragon had entered the goddess palace by hiding between the twin peaks of a maid, Yang Tian could not help but laugh. He did not expect the little blue dragon's trip to be so erotic. No, it was like that for humans, but for a dragon, the little blue dragon would not find it exciting, right? In a star field extremely far away from the Superstar Divine Temple, in a short period of time, a group of palaces similar to the Superstar Divine Temple appeared floating in the universe. Goddess Shi Chun, who had been released by Yang Tian, was currently standing on the highest observation platform. Below the platform, countless soldiers in red armor were kneeling on one knee and bending their waists, looking very respectful. Gao Yuan and Grandfather Hong, who were originally on the purple planet, were now standing under the observation platform, looking helplessly at Goddess Shi Chun on the platform. In addition to the two of them, there were hundreds of powerhouses like them. On the faces of these powerhouses, some were like Gao Yuan and Grandfather Hong, looking somewhat helpless, but more people were excited and full of fighting spirit. Chapter 476. 2 days later, Yang Tian and the other 4 god generals selected by the Superstar God Temple were brought to the entrance of the Temple Palace's main hall. The 5 of them were Yang Tian, Soli, Kista, Vast Universe Moyen, and Black Star Infinity. In the main hall of the Goddess Palace, Qin Fei was high above with dozens of priests standing below her. She looked very dignified. While waiting outside the hall, Yang Tian and Soli exchanged a few words before being called into the hall. Other than Yang Tian, the other 4 bowed to Qin Fei. An old priest stood up and explained a lot of rules of the Superstar God Temple. Next was the assignment of duties. Other than Yang Tian, what the other 4 wanted to hear the most was the Superstar God Temple's arrangement for them. First was Kista, who was assigned to guard the 9 Barbarian Star Zone. As soon as the old priest finished speaking, Kista was very excited. He knelt on one knee and bowed to the high and mighty Qin Fei. Guarding the 9 Barbarian Galaxy was a job with an extremely generous reward. There was a reward of 100 million star crystals every year. Since Kista was now a Superstar Warrior, he could also get a Superstar King Beast Core. Just this Beast Core alone was equivalent to guarding the 9 Barbarian Star Zone for 100 years. Of course, this Beast Core could only be obtained after Kista's term was up. If he could reach the Superstar Monarch level during his term, he would be able to obtain a Superstar Lord level Beast Core. In addition to the temple's reward, he could also use his position for personal gain while guarding the 9 Barbarian Star Zone. The Superstar God Temple did not object. In fact, this was the main point. If it was not for the completion of the plan, Yang Tian would have fought for this job. However, although the reward was very generous, he still had to risk his life to get it. After announcing Kista's job, it was Yang Tian's turn. As expected, Yang Tian's job was to stay in the temple and wait for orders. He would temporarily stay in the super universe. The reward was much less than Kista's, only 10 million star crystals every year. After the old priest finished the announcement, he glanced at Yang Tian. Yang Tian crossed his arms and turned his head away. In the eyes of others, he was very dissatisfied with the temple's arrangement for him. However, the truth was that Yang Tian did not want to bow to the wife above him. The old priest did not say anything about Yang Tian's rudeness. He then announced the appointment of Vast Universe Moyen and Black Star Infinity. Both of them had been sent out to guard the star field. Moreover, they were in the same star field and were the assistants of a divine general. This kind of job was very safe, and the rewards were ordinary. The 2 of them did not have any complaints. They followed Kista and bowed to Qin Fei. They bowed to Qin Fei, but in reality, they were just bowing to Superstar God Temple. Everyone knew the goddess was goddess. Then it was Soli's turn. Soli was assigned to the side of a high priestess named Roman as a guard captain. Soli was only in the star realm. She had no objections to this arrangement and bowed obediently. Soli was actually very satisfied with this arrangement. She and Yang Tian were both in the God Temple and could see each other normally. Soli had asked around in the past 2 days. In the God Temple, God generals could communicate with each other. After the work arrangements were made, Qin Fei stood up from her high seat under everyone's gaze. She slowly walked down the steps. Today, Qin Fei wore a gorgeous black robe and put on some light makeup. She looked mature and gave people a very noble feeling. Congratulations on becoming a God General of the God Temple. I hope you will work hard for the stability of the temple and the peace of the universe. After walking down the steps, Qin Fei spoke faintly as she walked. These almost formulaic words came out of Qin Fei's mouth. When Kista and the others heard it, they were a little excited. When she came in front of the 5 people, 5 white-robed maids brought 5 job certificates, which were 5 scrolls made of special materials. Qin Fei took the scrolls from the tray and handed them to the 5 people one by one. Except for Yang Tian, the other 4 people took them with both hands. After Yang Tian took the scroll in his hand, he opened it and looked at it. This thing was actually like a portrait of a person. On Yang Tian's job certificate was a portrait of Yang Tian. Next to the portrait was a job description. On the other side was a string of glowing red runes. These runes were equivalent to the seals used by humans on Earth. However, They had an anti-counterfeiting function. Only when the person held this certificate would the runes on it light up. Without this method, based on the abilities of cultivators, most of the god generals sent by the god temple would be fake. After handing over the proof of office to the 5 of them, Qin Fei and the others looked at the proof of office and kept it in their storage bracelets. Then, she said indifferently, Yang Tian, stay behind. The rest of you can leave. When Qin Fei said this, most of the priests frowned. This was not in accordance with the rules, but at this time, they could not refute Qin Fei because this would affect the position of the goddess in people's hearts. Yang Tian stayed. Soli and the other 3 god generals also left. Most of the priests also left. In the end, in the empty hall, only Yang Tian, Qin Fei, an old priest, and several of Qin Fei's maids were left. Hong Yujio, who had always been by Qin Fei's side, was not present. However, an old priest stayed. Seeing this old priest stay, Qin Fei turned around and said to the old priest, "Didn't you hear what I said?" Qin Fei's sullen appearance was useless to the old priest. The old priest smiled and said, "For the safety of the goddess, I can't leave." Qin Fei looked at the group of white-robed maids and said coldly, "What about you?" These maids did not dare to go against Qin Fei's orders. After bowing, they immediately left. In the end, only Larry stayed. Larry stayed. This was also Qin Fei's order. In Yang Tian's eyes, at this moment, Qin Fei's body really had the majesty of a ruler. Unfortunately, the old shaman did not pay any attention to her. After the maids left, Yang Tian gave a look to the little blue dragon lying on his shoulder. Xiaolong, the little blue dragon, understood Yang Tian's meaning. It jumped down from Yang Tian's shoulder and turned into a huge dragon. The little blue dragon turned into a huge dragon this time. It was the biggest dragon that Yang Tian had ever seen. After it finished transforming, it coiled up its body. Yang Tian and Qin Fei were in the middle of the little blue dragon's coiled body. At this moment, no matter which direction he looked from, he could not see Yang Tian and Qin Fei. This time, the old priest's line of sight was blocked by the little blue dragon. The little blue dragon raised its huge head and coldly stared at the old priest. The old priest frowned and looked at the little blue dragon, not knowing what to do for a moment. This was because the little blue dragon was Yang Tian's pet beast. Although it turned into a huge dragon, it did not take the initiative to attack him. And the rule of the temple was that fighting was not allowed in the temple. Yang Tian and Qin Fei took advantage of this extremely short time to hug and kiss each other. They used this direct method to express their longing for each other. Chapter 477. If Hong Yujio was here, Yang Tian and Qin Fei definitely wouldn't dare to do this. Once the little blue dragon transformed into a giant dragon, Hong Yujio would probably attack the little blue dragon. With the little blue dragon's current realm, it definitely wasn't Hong Yujio's match. Not to mention Hong Yujio, even the little blue dragon wouldn't be able to defeat this old shaman. To be able to become a shaman in the temple, if they didn't have any special abilities, they would at least be at the pinnacle of the superstar state. And this old shaman was obviously at the pinnacle of the superstar state. 3 minutes later, Yang Tian and Qin Fei finally separated. Both of them looked at each other as if they still hadn't had enough. This was because the little blue dragon let out a low roar. This was the little blue dragon's signal to the two of them. It was telling Yang Tian and Qin Fei that the old shaman couldn't hold back anymore. The old shaman was indeed worried about Qin Fei's safety because Yang Tian had just arrived at the Superstar Divinity Temple and couldn't be trusted completely. Plus, his vision was blocked by the little blue dragon's huge body. He didn't know what was going on with the goddess, so he couldn't help but feel anxious. Qin Fei immediately tidied up her black robe and hair that were messed up by Yang Tian and took a few steps away from Yang Tian. Yang Tian scratched the little blue dragon's body. The little blue dragon received the signal and immediately shrunk, turning into a mini dragon. When he saw that the goddess was fine and had a curious expression, the old shaman was finally relieved. When the little blue dragon returned to Yang Tian's shoulder, Yang Tian smiled and said to the old shaman, "Sorry, I was just showing the goddess how special this pet beast is." The old shaman was very dissatisfied with Yang Tian's actions. He frowned and said, "If you do this again, I will definitely report it to the higher-ups and expel you from the Superstar Divinity Temple." After saying that, the old shaman waved his hand at Yang Tian. Yang Tian turned his head and winked at Qin Fei before turning around and leaving the hall. To Yang Tian and Qin Fei, what happened just now was really a very exciting thing. Probably since the establishment of the Superstar Divine Palace, no one had ever done such a thing in the main hall of the Goddess Palace. After Kista and the other two left the main hall of the Goddess Palace, they immediately left the Superstar God Temple. This was because, to them, staying in the temple was very restrictive. There was always a feeling of oppression. Soli also went to report to the great priestess named Roman. After returning to the Great Space Palace, Yang Tian made the two pendants. After that, he started to flip through the books that recorded runes in the Great Space Palace, as well as the fragments of runes that looked useless. High Priest Tai Yu had also been paying attention to Yang Tian from time to time. When he saw how seriously Yang Tian was studying runes, he was very satisfied with Yang Tian. However, he didn't know that Yang Tian didn't understand runes at all. The reason why he was so busy was to enrich the rune database of the Strange program. During this process, Yang Tian kept in touch with Qin Fei through the little blue dragon and Larry's help every 1 or 2 days. Qin Fei also didn't stay idle during this time. She was thinking of a way to enter the Construction Palace of the Superstar Divine Palace. Construction Palace was the place where the Superstar Divine Palace stored all kinds of information. It was very tightly guarded. Under normal circumstances, only the great shamans could enter. During this time, Qin Fei pretended to be playing in the temple. She wanted to pass by the side of the Construction Palace to take a look, but she was stopped by the divine generals guarding the Construction Palace. Of course, Qin Fei wouldn't give up. She scolded the guarding divine generals and wanted to force her way in. However, the Construction Palace was also covered by a rune array. Qin Fei was blocked outside the gate by the energy of the rune array and couldn't enter. Seeing that Qin Fei was blocked by the rune array, the guarding divine generals explained to Qin Fei that not only the whole palace, but even the storage boxes inside were also covered with rune arrays. Only a few great shamans could open them. Qin Fei finally understood that even if she entered the Construction Palace, she wouldn't be able to get the chip that recorded the coordinates of Earth. Next, Yang Tian could only rely on himself. After Yang Tian got the news, he asked the little blue dragon to start to understand the situation of the guards of the Construction Palace. Because no one came to the Superstar Divine Palace for a long time, the internal security of the Superstar Divine Palace was actually very lax. Even if the guards were all cultivators and had no problem standing guard for a few days and nights, the guards still had to change shifts every once in a while. During the change of shifts, there was about 3 minutes that could be used. Because during the change of shifts, the guards of the Construction Palace seemed a little messy. This was the result of the little blue dragon's long-term observation. After the investigation, Yang Tian needed Soli's help. Soli's job was very easy. As the captain of the guards, she only needed to patrol once a day. The rest of the time could be used to cultivate. Manluo Palace. This was where Soli was. The name of the palace also came from Great Shaman Roman. It was just that the 2 words were reversed. In this universe, there were many female cultivators. In the entire Manluo Palace, most of the guards were female. Compared to the Grand Universe Palace, the Manluo Palace was countless times more lively. Bang! Again. As soon as Yang Tian entered the area of the Manluo Palace, he heard a series of shouts. Most of them were women's voices. Needless to say, the female cultivators were sparring with each other. What Yang Tian didn't know was that most of the male guards in the Superstar Divine Palace wanted to be transferred to the Manluo Palace. That was because this place had the most beautiful women in the Superstar Divine Palace. The stronger a cultivator was, the more beautiful they would be. This was also a result of biological evolution. This was because a perfect creature, including ability and appearance, could pass down their genes more easily than a weak or ugly creature. It was said that there were no ugly female cultivators above the planet realm. This was not without reason. Yang Tian walked through the forest and flowers, and soon, a spacious area appeared in front of him. This field was circular and the size of a standard football field. The ground was covered with turf and surrounded by 3 stone steps. At least a few hundred people sat on the stone steps, watching 2 female cultivators in black tights spar. Their clothes were very thin, almost sticking to their bodies. All the curves on their bodies were revealed, giving the men a strong visual impact. The 2 women were both peak planet realm cultivators. They fought barehanded, and the process was very intense. Seeing the 2 make wonderful attacks and dodging movements, the male cultivators in the crowd couldn't help but cheer loudly. Some even whistled. Yang Tian felt that this situation was very familiar. Yang Tian was in blue armor and didn't wear a helmet. He had long, black hair that draped over his shoulders. With the increase in his realm, his figure had become very tall, and his face had become very handsome. As soon as he arrived, he attracted the attention of many people. As Yang Tian didn't emit any obvious energy fluctuations, no one could guess his realm. Seeing Yang Tian arrive, the black-armored Soli was a little surprised. She knew that Yang Tian had come to find her, so she immediately walked quickly toward Yang Tian. Chapter 478. Yang Tian, what's the matter? Soli asked with a smile after arriving in front of Yang Tian. She knew that Yang Tian was fine and most likely wouldn't come looking for her. Soli didn't care about this either. She knew that Yang Tian's thoughts were on the Divine Lady. Yang Tian was a little embarrassed. He scratched his head and said with a smile, Soli, I need your help. In order not to let others hear his voice, Yang Tian said this sentence with mental power. No problem. Soli looked around and saw that many people were looking at her and Yang Tian. She nodded and said, It's not convenient to talk here. Come with me. With that, Soli brought Yang Tian to her residence. As a divine general of Manluo Palace, Soli had her own room. She wouldn't live in a large room like other guards. After Soli closed the door, Yang Tian glanced at the layout of the room. The furnishings in the room had been carefully arranged and were extremely neat. Many of the things were high-tech equipment. These things should have been brought by Soli herself. After sitting down in a comfortable semi-circular chair, Yang Tian directly said to Soli, I need a set of black armor that's standard in the Superstar Divinity Temple. Soli didn't ask why Yang Tian wanted such armor. She immediately took out a set of brand new black armor from her storage bracelet. In the Superstar Divinity Temple, the armor worn by the guards was specially customized and mass-produced. As long as he has such an armor, Yang Tian would be able to start his plan. Creak, seeing Soli take out the armor, the little blue dragon carefully observed it and then told Yang Tian that the guards of Architect Palace were wearing such armor. The runes on the armor were exactly the same. Soli, I'll return this armor to you soon, Yang Tian said gratefully after putting away the armor. While the Superstar God Temple was large and had endless wealth, its internal management was extremely meticulous. Without Soli's help, it would have been troublesome to obtain such a low-quality armor. That was because the distribution of each set of armor was recorded. Ordinary guards only had one set of armor. If they were damaged in battle, they would have to hand in the damaged armor in order to get a new one. Soli had a spare because she was the captain of the guards. She was in charge of dozens of guards and had 5 spare sets of armor. As long as the people below didn't damage 5 sets of armor at once, the people above wouldn't notice that one set of armor was missing. Although Soli didn't ask what the armor was used for, Yang Tian felt that he should let Soli know. This was also a form of respect. I'm going to use this set of armor to enter the construction palace. That's where the coordinates of our planet are. After Yang Tian put away the armor, he told Soli what he was going to do next. It was the first time Soli had heard Yang Tian talk about his origin and the matters of his home planet in such detail. Soli was very interested in Yang Tian's matters and listened attentively. Although Earth is an exile planet, its environment is very good. It must have been modified later, right? It's impossible for the Superstar God Temple to use a planet with such a good environment as an exile planet. After Yang Tian finished speaking, Soli looked pensive as she lightly said, "Don't worry." Yang Tian nodded. On our planet, in what we call the ancient era, there were many powerful people. Their strength was unimaginable. Speaking of this, Yang Tian remembered the scene in the small world of the Star Mine's owner when his body was corroded and the masked man in black appeared. Yang Tian's bloodline power also began to appear at that time. Under Soli's concerned gaze, Yang Tian frowned and fell silent for a moment. Then, he looked up at Soli and said, "Soli, what about you? Where's your home?" Soli laughed self-deprecatingly. "I don't have a home. All the planets I was born on and my people were destroyed long ago. I was lucky to be out with my mother at that time and avoided disaster. From then on, I swore to become a top expert of the universe." Yang Tian realized that Soli was even worse off than him. At least he had a home to return to. Soli, on the other hand, was like a wanderer who could only go wherever she wanted. For a moment, Yang Tian didn't know how to comfort Soli. After Soli finished speaking, she smiled at Yang Tian and said, "So, Yang Tian, you have to become the strongest person in the universe. Only then can you protect your home and your people." "Okay." Yang Tian nodded heavily. Although Yang Tian was already at the super rank, there was still a long way to go before he could become a top expert of the universe. After returning to the Great Universe Palace, Yang Tian had the little blue dragon observe for 2 more days. After formulating a detailed plan, he finally began to implement it. There was no day or night in the Superstar God Temple because for cultivators, the changes in light could be completely ignored. Ordinary humans needed to work during the day and rest at night. This was actually a kind of adjustment because their bodies weren't strong enough and were very dependent on the environment. But for cultivators, whether it was day or night, it wouldn't affect their cultivation. Around the Architect Palace, when the hundreds of guards began to change shifts, Yang Tian put on the black armor he got from Soli and swaggered to a forest on the left side of the Architect Palace. At this time, there were guards who were about to go back to rest after their shift, and there were also guards who were taking over. Some were wearing helmets, some weren't. In the beginning, the guards changed shifts in an orderly manner in batches, but now they changed shifts all at once. The hundreds of guards were led by several captains, and the guards moved around frequently, so it was impossible for these captains to recognize the hundreds of guards. The current Yang Tian, even if the other guards, or even the guard captains were to see him, they would not suspect him. This was the loophole that Yang Tian could take advantage of. In these short 2 to 3 minutes, he could get close to the rune formation enveloping the Architect Palace. Standing at the edge of the forest, there was no one around, so the strange program controlled Yang Tian's hands and quickly changed his hand gestures. Circles of rune energy were released from Yang Tian's hands and came into contact with the rune formation energy enveloping the Architect Palace. After about 2 minutes, the strange program received some information and ended the investigation. At this time, he couldn't stay here any longer because the guards who were supposed to leave had almost all left. As for the guards who took over the shift, they had almost arrived at their posts. Under the guidance of the little blue dragon, Yang Tian shuttled through the forest and the dense grass and quickly left the Architect Palace. For 10 days, Yang Tian was like this. Although each time was only 2 minutes or even 1 minute, the strange program had accumulated enough information over the past 10 days. Next, it was time to crack the rune formation enveloping the Architect Palace. Chapter 479. After some investigation, the strange program calculated that there were 99 layers of talisman arrays in the Builder's Palace. The simulated image that appeared in Yang Tian's mind was like a big, colorful bubble. Such talisman arrays didn't only exist on the ground, but also the foundation of the Builder's Palace. Therefore, it was impossible to dig a hole into the Builder's Palace from the foundation. It was almost impossible to crack such a dense talisman array in a short time. Fortunately, the strange program existed. After 2 days of calculation, the strange program finally designed the talisman array that Yang Tian needed. This talisman array had 2 functions. One was to crack it, and the other was to hide one's aura. The cracking function was not to destroy the talisman array in the builder's palace, but to create a pass like the one worn by the high priest so that Yang Tian could enter and leave at will. At the same time, Yang Tian's entry and exit could not be recorded by the talisman array. Recently, there were often high priests entering and leaving the builder's palace to retrieve some items. Yang Tian needed a talisman array that could completely hide his aura. This was also a precautionary measure. Since there was a talisman array on the storage box, it would take some time to crack it. During this process, if someone entered the builder's palace and was discovered, it would be troublesome. According to the rules of the Superstar Divinity Temple, if Yang Tian was caught, his energy world would be destroyed and he would be expelled from the Superstar Divinity Temple. At that time, even if he was chosen by High Priest Taiyu, he would not be able to avoid this kind of punishment. The two talisman arrays were carved on a green, palm-thick, palm-sized stone. This stone was taken from the 9 Barbarian Star Zone. There were many of them in the Taiyu Palace. It was a good material to practice drawing talisman arrays. The process of carving the talisman array was, of course, controlled by the Strange program and completed with Yang Tian's cooperation. One side was carved with a cracking talisman array, and the other side was a talisman array to hide one's aura. After carving, the Strange program simulated it several times. After confirming that there were no problems, Yang Tian finally set off with the little blue dragon. After 3 days, the procedure of changing the guards of the builder's palace did not change much. During the change of guard, Yang Tian wore a set of black armor and appeared beside the architect's palace. On the other hand, the little blue dragon was hiding in the bushes, guarding Yang Tian. When no one was paying attention, Yang Tian came to the small forest where he often stayed before. The little blue dragon took the opportunity to jump onto Yang Tian's shoulder. At this time, Yang Tian and the little blue dragon were both enveloped in the deciphering glyph array. The shape of this glyph energy was similar to the glyph energy that enveloped the architect's palace. It looked like a bubble. At this time, Yang Tian's heart was actually nervous, not because he was afraid of being discovered. Instead, he felt that he would soon be able to obtain the coordinates of Earth. At that time, he would be able to return to Earth and see his family and friends. Although he was nervous, Yang Tian's movements were very fast. When no one was paying attention, he stepped into the glyph array that enveloped the architect's palace. During this process, Yang Tian was acutely aware that when he broke into the glyph array, there was a slight sense of oppression outside his body. Fortunately, this feeling of oppression only lasted for a moment and then disappeared. After entering the glyph array of the architect's palace, Yang Tian immediately sped up and hid behind a circular pillar and corridor guardrail. After Yang Tian's observation, this was a visual blind spot. From the front and the side of the architect's palace, he could not be seen. As soon as Yang Tian hid, someone not far away exclaimed in surprise, "What's wrong?" At this time, another person's voice sounded. "I just saw a person there. How did he disappear in the blink of an eye? Where is he?" "Beside the small forest." "He must have left, but that's too fast. In just a few blinks of an eye." The glyph array that enveloped the architect's palace did not prevent sound waves from entering. The conversation between the two quickly passed into Yang Tian's ears. If Yang Tian had not entered the glyph array of the architect's palace at this time, others would not suspect anything when they saw him. But he disappeared so quickly, which was a bit strange. While talking, the two people walked towards Yang Tian. These two short-haired young men were not wearing helmets. If they walked more than 10 meters, they would be able to see Yang Tian. The future would be changed by them. When Yang Tian was extremely nervous, a guard captain's voice sounded. "What are you two doing there? The insect race is about to start." As soon as they heard the word insect race, their eyes lit up with excitement. They immediately turned around and walked quickly towards the guard captain. Next, Yang Tian heard the 3 people talking about the insect race. As the 3 people walked further and further, their voices became softer and softer. Yang Tian finally let out a sigh of relief. Just now, he was almost discovered. If the 2 people walked more than 10 steps and appeared at the place where Yang Tian was standing before, they would be able to see Yang Tian. The guard captain that Yang Tian did not know was simply Yang Tian's lucky star. The insect race that the three people were talking about was a kind of insect race that was broadcasted live across the universe. It was a kind of gambling game. Yang Tian had heard of it before. Rich and bored people like to play this kind of gambling game. In fact, when they saw Yang Tian disappear, they did not really feel that there was anything wrong, because a person disappearing in a few seconds is a very normal thing. Not to mention cultivators, even ordinary people can do it. Therefore, when they talked about the insect race, the two people forgot about Yang Tian's disappearance. After a few minutes, the change of guard was completed. There were no black-armored guards walking around the architect's palace. After that, every 20 minutes, there would be a patrol team of 18 that would pass by not far away. After entering the array formation of the architect's palace, the aura concealing array formation was immediately activated. The aura emitted by him and the little blue dragon would not be leaked out. As long as others could not see Yang Tian would not be discovered. After waiting quietly for about 5 minutes, Yang Tian began his next move. He crouched down and walked along the corridor outside the architect's palace. He found a ventilation hole that was about 1 meter in diameter. All the palaces in the Superstar Divinity Temple were built with stone and a small amount of wood and metal. Not only were they exquisite, but they were also sturdy and durable. In special places where it was easy for people to sneak in, there were array formations for defense. Of course, there were also ventilation holes. The array formations of the entire architect's palace were simply everywhere. It was simply armed to the teeth. Such a sophisticated defense also meant that the things stored in the architect's palace were too important. It was not an exaggeration to say that most of the wealth of the Superstar Divinity Temple was concentrated here. If all the wealth of the architect's palace was taken away, in this universe, it could be described as rich enough to rival a country. Suppressing his excitement, the strange program controlled Yang Tian's hands and began to crack the array formation at the ventilation hole. Chapter 480. The rune array at the vent was much simpler. Under the control of the strange program, Yang Tian's hands emitted waves of rune energy and touched the rune array at the vent. After inspection, the rune energy in the vent was independent and did not connect with the rune energy outside. This result allowed Yang Tian to sigh in relief, because if this small rune array was connected with the rune array outside, it would be much more difficult to enter the architect palace. That would be pulling one hair and affecting the whole body. However, it would be much more difficult to connect the rune array at the architect palace to the rune array outside. This was also the result of the strange program's calculations. If the strange program were to design such a large and small set of rune arrays, it would take months of continuous calculation. If it were to let a human do the calculation, who knows how many years it would take. In the end, the result might not be successful. The strange program quickly found a way to crack it. Yang Tian took out the rune pen that the flying cloud high priest gave him. He jumped and touched one of the runes at the vent, destroying one of the runes. When Yang Tian landed on the ground, the talisman array at the vent was destroyed. The rune array here was not obvious. It would take a long time for it to be discovered. By then, Yang Tian might have already left the Superstar Divinity Temple. Squeak, squeak. As soon as the rune array was destroyed by Yang Tian, the little blue dragon sensed a group of people passing by not far away. It immediately whispered to Yang Tian. Yang Tian immediately put away the rune pen and jumped into the vent. As soon as Yang Tian entered the vent, a total of 19 people, including the guard captain, slowly passed by not far away. Once again, he was almost discovered. Yang Tian, who entered the vent, could not help but let out a sigh of relief. The architect palace's defense was really tight, but this was not the end. The vent was about 1 meter in diameter. Not only were there runes at the entrance, there were also many physical mechanisms inside. Yang Tian had already predicted that it was time for the little blue dragon to make a move. The little blue dragon, which was in the shape of a mini dragon, looked around the ventilation duct and found dozens of trigger devices. After searching once, the The little blue dragon was still worried. He went back and forth 3 times in a row. After confirming that there were no problems, he told Yang Tian that he could pass. Under the little blue dragon's guidance, Yang Tian bent down and slowly walked forward in the tunnel. The passageway was straight at first, but then it started to curve and curve. There were even forks at the end. With the guidance of the little blue dragon, it took Yang Tian about an hour to get out of the vent and enter a room in the construction palace. Physics was no longer effective against an expert like Yang Tian. Fortunately, the person who designed the top level of this palace was probably very resistant to high-tech things and did not install smart surveillance cameras at the key points. Otherwise, it would be even more troublesome for Yang Tian. At that time, he would need Bell and the strange program to work together, which would take a lot of time. If he left for too long, it would be easy for him to be discovered. This was because Great Priest Tai Yu had come back to see Yang Tian when he was trying to decipher the array outside. When Yang Tian left, in order to not let anyone discover that he was not in the room, he had made meticulous arrangements. The door of the room was closed, and there was a Do Not Disturb sign hanging outside. Bell had also designed a program for the housework robot, so that it would make some noise every once in a while. This way, in a short period of time, no one should be able to force their way into Yang Tian's room and discover that Yang Tian was not there. But as time passed, it was hard to say. The most uncertain factor was Great Priest Tai Yu. The Great Universe Palace was Great Priest Tai Yu's territory. No matter what the situation was, he had the authority to enter every room in the Great Universe Palace. Moreover, this old man was particular about the rules when it came to runes, but in life, he was a hothead. Sometimes, no matter what the other person was doing in the room, he would just push open the door and enter. The room Yang Tian came to was over 1,000 square meters in size, which took up about 1% of the entire Architect Palace. There were 3 rows of metal shelves in the room, each about 5 meters tall and divided into 10 layers. They were filled with large boxes made of green stone. On each of the metal shelves, there were about 100 of these large stone boxes. From Yang Tian's point of view, these stone boxes looked like coffins. They were about 1.5 meters long and 1 meter wide. They were rectangular in shape and had a lid that was about 2 feet thick. Runes were engraved all over their surfaces. These are the storage boxes. Every storage box had a number on it. In a room like this, there were only a few hundred boxes on the walls. If all the rooms in the Architect Palace were like this, the number of storage boxes would only be in the tens of thousands. Then, the numbers could range from 1 to tens of thousands. However, there was a long string of numbers on each box. There were dozens of them. Moreover, the numbers on the boxes next to each other were also very different. After observing for a while, Yang Tian understood that the storage boxes in the Architect Palace were placed randomly. Or perhaps they were placed in a password. If someone who didn't know the rules broke in, it would take a very long time to find the storage box they wanted. They would have to go through all the rooms in the Architect Palace to find it. Every storage box was engraved with special runes and couldn't be stored in a storage space. At the same time, these runes formed a runic energy lock. If someone casually touched it, it would activate the runic mechanism on it. Yang Tian felt a headache coming on when he thought about these settings. Even a rune expert like Great Priest Tai, you wouldn't be able to open these storage boxes and find what they wanted if they entered the Architect Palace. However, it was different with the Strange program. The computing power of the Strange program couldn't be compared to thousands of rune experts like Great Priest Tai Yu. Yang Tian looked around the room and didn't find a storage box Dean he told him about. Then he could only go to the next room. However, before leaving, Yang Tian wanted to open one of the storage boxes and see what was inside. This could be considered a test. At the very least, he wanted to know how long it would take to open a storage box after finding it. Yang Tian casually chose a storage box. Then, the Strange program controlled Yang Tian's body again. He raised his hands, and his hands continuously changed positions. Waves of runic energy were emitted from Yang Tian's hands and touched the storage box that Yang Tian wanted to open. The runic energy emitted from Yang Tian's hands was directional and extremely well controlled by the Strange program. This was because the runic arrays on each storage box were different. At least, there were some slight differences. During this process, an energy rune diagram appeared in Yang Tian's mind. From the looks of it, the storage box looked like it was wrapped in a net. Chapter 481. In addition to the outside, there's also a layer of runic energy inside. If the runic array on top is not cracked, the storage box will explode violently and trigger the alarm. After the investigation, the strange program told Yang Tian the results. In other words, the net-like runic mechanism on top of the storage box that Yang Tian saw was just the surface layer. Inside it, there was another layer of rune mechanisms. The runic energy on the outside was the defense, and the inside was the lock of the storage box. Yang Tian couldn't help but sigh. This kind of storage box's defense was too abnormal. The cultivator who designed this storage box had taken many factors into consideration. The storage box was not big, and the number of runes that could be carved was not many. It did not take long for the strange program to crack it. After a few minutes of calculation, the strange program figured out the way to open the storage box. Under the control of the strange program, Yang Tian's hands moved quickly again. Waves of invisible runic energy were emitted from his hands. Click! Suddenly, there was a soft sound. The sound came from inside the storage box. A physical lock that was activated by runic energy was opened. The lock inside the storage box was actually made up of two parts. One was runic energy, and the other was the physical lock. The physical lock was closely related to runic energy. When the runic energy inside detected the runic energy that opened it, it would stimulate the physical lock to move. There were also runes on the physical lock. When it moved, the key runes would shift, and the energy support of the runes on the storage box would be cut off. Therefore, the runic mechanism on the storage box also disappeared. Of course, the runes on this kind of storage box also needed the support of energy. Inside this box, there was an energy chamber. To put it bluntly, this kind of unlocking method was like an electronic remote control lock. It just turned the radio into runic energy. In the little blue dragon's eyes, Yang Tian let out a long breath and put his hand on the storage box. It seemed heavy, but in fact, it didn't require much strength. Yang Tian just gave a light push, and the lid on the storage box opened. What appeared before Yang Tian's eyes was an entire chest of beast cores. They were all purple superstar warrior level beast cores. Each beast core was wrapped in a transparent shell. It looked like a box of walnuts. There were at least hundreds of them. Seeing these beast cores, Yang Tian's heart couldn't help but beat faster. Outside, even if one had the money, one might not necessarily be able to buy such a beast core. But here, they were packed in boxes and piled up in such a messy manner. Seeing so many beast cores, the little blue dragon lying on Yang Tian's shoulder could not help but swallow its saliva and let out a goo sound. If these beast cores were just left there must be no way to count them. Even if there were a limited number of them, it would be impossible for him to take them all at once. If he were to take some away, it shouldn't be possible for him to be discovered for the time being, right? Yang Tian rolled his eyes and grabbed a bunch. The purple beast cores had a transparent protective shell and were about the size of a pigeon's egg. Yang Tian only managed to grab 9 of them. After taking 9 beast cores, the number of beast cores in the entire chest didn't seem to have changed. Yang Tian immediately put the 9 purple beast cores into the storage bracelet. Originally, he wanted to take more, but Yang Tian suppressed the greed in his heart. Because if he took more, he couldn't help but take more later and even open all the storage boxes. This was undoubtedly a crazy behavior. In the end, he would forget the purpose of coming. Later, if someone came in and wanted to take the beast cores and found that the number of beast cores was significantly reduced, they would definitely start to investigate. Yang Tian gritted his teeth and smoothed out the beast cores in the box, then closed the lid of the storage box. Click! With a soft sound, the rune mechanism on the storage box opened again. At this time, Yang Tian let out a long breath. It was really not easy to control the greed in his heart. There was no storage box in this room that Yang Tian was looking for, so he could only go to the next room. Of course, this room had a door. It was a stone door engraved with runes. There was also a rune mechanism on the door, and the internal structure was the same as the storage box. A few minutes later, with the help of the strange sequence, Yang Tian opened the stone door mechanism. With a slight force, the stone door moved a gap. Yang Tian carefully poked his head out and looked outside. Outside was a rectangular passage about 1 meter wide and 3 meters high. Opposite this door, there was also a stone door. The top of the passage was covered with glowing crystals, which illuminated the passage particularly bright. Under the bright light, the passage seemed very quiet. Xiaolong, go take a look, Yang Tian said to the little blue dragon lying on his shoulder. The little blue dragon immediately jumped down from Yang Tian's shoulder and looked in the passage. Squeak! A few minutes later, the little blue dragon returned and told Yang Tian that there were no high-tech electronic devices in the passage, nor were there any mechanisms. The passage was very long, and it only went a few hundred meters before returning. Yang Tian nodded and finally felt relieved and walked out of the door. Next, Yang Tian cracked the stone door on the opposite side and walked into the room. After seeing that there was no storage box, he immediately left the room. Yang Tian was very fast. In about 10 minutes, he could open a room and search it. Because the more rune mechanisms that the strange sequence cracked, the faster it designed the cracking program. This was because the rune mechanism on the stone door was roughly the same, but there were some subtle changes. This was just like the door locks made by humans on Earth. The structure of the lock was the same. The difference was the position of the lock. In an hour, Yang Tian could find 6 to 7 rooms. He only needed half a day to finish looking through the hundreds of rooms in the entire construction palace. 6 hours later, he had already searched more than 40 rooms. In the 45th room, Yang Tian finally found the storage box he was looking for. Seeing that the code on the storage box was exactly the same as what Dini said, Yang Tian was a little excited. Inside, there was a chip that stored the coordinates of Earth. As long as he got the coordinates of Earth in the universe, he could return to Earth at any time. After getting the coordinates of Earth, the next step was to find an opportunity to bring Qin Fei out of the superstar divinity temple. After standing in front of the storage box for a full 5 minutes, Yang Tian finally calmed down. A few minutes later, the strange sequence helped Yang Tian crack the rune mechanism of the storage box, and a ka sound came from inside. After Yang Tian opened the lid, what appeared in front of Yang Tian's eyes were densely packed small grids. The grids were 5 centimeters long and wide, and in each of the grids, there was a shiny black chip. There were about 300 of them. So many, hundreds of black chips. Which one was the chip that recorded the coordinates of Earth? Looking at so many chips, Yang Tian smiled bitterly. This was not strange. It was impossible for such a big storage box to only contain one small chip, right? The capacity of each chip was huge. Even if he got the chip that stored the coordinates of Earth, he would have to search through the massive amount of information. Chapter 482. With so many chips, he could only read them one by one or copy the contents completely. Yang Tian thought as he glanced at the stone door. The door had not closed, and Yang Tian immediately walked in front of the stone door, lightly pulled it, and with a ka sound, the stone door closed. This way, if someone came here, he could at least make some preparations beforehand. One must know that reading the data of these chips would take a long time. After closing the door, Yang Tian took out the support tool bell from his storage bracelet. Master! Bell called out the moment it appeared. Yang Tian made a shushing gesture and said softly, "Ding dang from now on, be softer." Understood, Bell said. Yang Tian immediately took out a chip from the storage box, grabbed Bell, and placed the chip in a Bell's card slot, and said to Bell, "Ding dang, copy all the data." "Yes, master," Bell replied softly, and began to copy the data. But after a minute, Bell said to Yang Tian, "Master, my storage space is not enough. I need you to provide blank chips." Blank chips? How could there be? There were more than 300 chips here. If he wanted to copy all the chips, he would need more than 300 blank chips. Yang Tian took another careful look at the storage box. There were 15 small compartments in the horizontal row, 22 small compartments in the vertical row, and 8 small compartments in the top. There were a total of 322 chips. In other words, Yang Tian would need 322 chips to copy all the data here. Precious things were usually not physical objects, but information. For example, the coordinates of some secret star fields and what was inside. If Yang Tian was given a box of purple superclass beast nuclei and was given the same choice as this box of chips, Yang Tian would definitely choose the chips in this box without any hesitation, even if these chips did not contain the coordinates of Earth. Yang Tian was vexed. If he knew this would happen, he would have prepared more blank chips. This kind of large capacity chip was actually very cheap. 10 star crystals could be exchanged for 1,000 chips. Sensing Yang Tian's vexation, the strange program reminded Yang Tian, "You can remove the chips in some of the existing equipment." Yes, Yang Tian heard and could not help but slap his forehead and shouted happily. When Yang Tian and Soli went out for training for the first time, Yang Tian purchased a lot of high-tech equipment, and almost every one of them had a chip on them. Yang Tian immediately took out a lot of high-tech equipment from the storage bracelet. The storage capacity of the Black Dragon spaceship was very large, and its own storage function, comparable to dozens of these large capacity chips. But the space here was too small and could not fit the spaceship. There were a lot of things. There were 12 spherical detectors, as well as high-powered communicators, small aircrafts, and particle guns. Yang Tian flipped through the items one by one. Finally, Yang Tian picked up a silver-white triangular object, a data tower. When Yang Tian saw this thing, he immediately recalled that this was the data tower that was stored inside the storage bracelet he obtained after opening it. While Yang Tian was observing the data tower, the strange program suddenly reminded Yang Tian, "With this data tower, it will be easy. Its capacity is comparable to thousands of chips." "What's the use of this thing?" Yang Tian asked. The strange program replied, "The data tower can store a lot of information, and it can also send information to the universe. And, of course, it can also receive information from the universe network. On every habitable planet, there was such a data tower. Because of its uniqueness, a habitable planet can only have one such data tower. Of course, there are also backups." After the strange program's explanation, Yang Tian finally understood that this data tower was the key to the universe network. The small teleportation array disk inside, it could send a lot of data to the universe network, and it could also receive information from the universe network. This data tower was a product that was the perfect combination of runes and high technology. The strange program also reminded Yang Tian that if he was on a planet without any other data towers, this data tower would automatically activate and use its function to connect with the universe network. This kind of reminder was very important to Yang Tian, because if he returned to Earth and took out this data tower, it would expose Earth's coordinates. After knowing the function of this data tower, Yang Tian immediately kept the other things in the storage bracelet and then held the data tower and said to Bell, "Bell, copy the data into this data tower. If you detect any information about Earth's coordinates, immediately inform me." Bell said, "Master, Bell does not know the information about Earth. Please tell me." Yang Tian thought for a while and then took out a piece of green stone from the storage bracelet and a small talisman pin that he got from the Great Universe Palace. Yang Tian drew the shape of Earth on the green stone, and the shape of the continents was also drawn clearly. After drawing, Yang Tian felt that something was wrong because the continents on Earth were moving and the shape was constantly changing. Therefore, Yang Tian even drew the shape of the continents from hundreds of thousands of years ago that were simulated by scientists when he was studying in high school. He even drew the shape of the solar system. This way, as long as Bell searched according to the data, she might be able to find the data about Earth. "Understood, Master." Bell responded and flew to the top of the data tower and opened a triangular hole at the bottom and landed on the top of the data tower. Yang Tian let go of his hand, and Bell brought the data tower to the ground. The data began to be copied, and the small pieces that formed the data tower were like indicator lights, constantly flashing with different colors. The copying process was very fast, and in about 3 minutes, the data of a chip was copied into the data tower by Bell. Once the chip's data had been completely copied, Bell would then eject the chip. Yang Tian immediately took out the chip and replaced it with another one. Yang Tian was responsible for replacing the chip, and the little blue dragon was responsible for sensing the movements outside. Once someone came in, it would immediately alert Yang Tian. The copying time of the chip was not fixed. Some chips were full of data and needed more than 3 minutes to copy. Some chips had very little data and only needed 10 seconds or even a few seconds. On average, about 30 chips could be copied in an hour. The total time needed was about 10 hours. It was not too long, and Yang Tian decided that once the data was copied, he would immediately leave the builder's palace. After that, he would buy some blank chips and copy the data from the data tower onto the blank chips. After that, he would delete the data in the data tower, and if he could not delete it, he would destroy the data tower. Otherwise, the data stored in the Superstar God Temple would be made public to the entire universe. Chapter 483. During the process of copying the data, Yang Tian was still a little nervous because he didn't know when someone would come. And the people who entered were all great priests. With their cultivation, they could crush him and the little blue dragon with a single finger. After more than 3 hours, he had already copied the 100th chip. "Master, I found it." Suddenly, Bell reminded Yang Tian. Hearing that, Yang Tian's eyes lit up, and he anxiously said to Bell, "Open it and take a look." Bell opened a projection window and projected a 3-dimensional image in the air. What appeared in front of Yang Tian's eyes was a small galaxy that was very similar to the solar system. Yang Tian saw one of the blue planets and said to Bell, "Zoom in on this planet." Bell immediately zoomed in on the planet that was similar to Earth, and the data of Earth was marked on it. Then Bell said, "Master, these are the coordinates of an exiled planet." In the universe, there were actually many galaxies that were similar to the solar system, but at the same time, they met many conditions. Yang Tian was sure that this was Earth, although the shape of the land on it was different from the shape of the land on Earth. "Has the data of this chip been copied?" Yang Tian looked carefully, and after confirming that this was the Earth he was looking for, he asked Bell. "The copying has been completed," Bell replied. Yang Tian rolled his eyes and said to Bell, "Replace the coordinates of this planet on this chip." "Which coordinates do you want to replace?" Bell asked. Yang Tian thought for a moment. "Whatever. The further away from Earth, the better." "Master, Bell understands," Bell replied. A few seconds later, she said to Yang Tian, "The data on the chip has been changed. The date on it remains the same." "All right." Yang Tian smiled and nodded. This way, if Yang Tian brought Xin Fei back to Earth in the future, no one would remember the coordinates of Earth. Even the great priests of the Superstar Divine Temple would not be able to find Earth in a short period of time. Yang Tian believed that there should not be any priests in the Superstar Divinity Temple who would remember the coordinates of some exiled planets. After changing the data, Yang Tian removed the chip from the bell and replaced it with a new chip. Superstar Academy, Principal Xing Yi's private room. Dean Xing Yi, who was lying on the bed, was already on the verge of death. The energy in his body was rapidly dissipating. Professor Fu Wei had no choice but to use talisman arrays to maintain his life. At that moment, there were dozens of professors in the room. Every one of them had a sad expression on their faces. It wasn't only because Principal Xing Yi was about to leave this world. They were also saddened by the fact that life would always have an end, thinking that they would also have a day like this. Dean Xing, he was a kind old man. After being in the Superstar Academy for so many years, the professors in the academy all believed in him. It was not because of how powerful he was, but because of how knowledgeable he was. If he didn't spend a large amount of time on things that interested him, Dean Xing, he could still live for a long time. Similar to the humans on Earth, Dean Xing called so many people over because he wanted to make arrangements for his funeral. The new dean is Brilliant Star Guna, the divine general you saw last time. This person is not easy to get along with. Everyone, don't argue with him in the future, especially Shen Wu, Fu Wei, Zhao Hong. You guys have weird tempers. Try not to see him in the future. After I die, I don't want to build any grave. I don't want my grave to become a training project for the students. Speaking of which, Dean Xing, he couldn't help but laugh. His voice was extremely low. Shen Wu, Professor Fu Wei, and a few others whose names were mentioned by Dean Xing, all had warm eyes. A new emperor brings in new ministers. These people who were not successful in the Superstar Divine Temple, after coming out of the temple and entering the Superstar Academy, lived quite comfortably. This was all thanks to Dean Xingyi's care. Otherwise, with these people's tempers, even the Superstar Academy would not tolerate them. At this time, Dean Xingyi was struggling to speak. After pausing for a while, he continued, "This old man knows that you have all accepted Shichen's invitation. This old man wants to advise you not to get involved. If you really can't stay in the academy anymore, go to the Death Star Field and wait." "Why do we have to go to the Death Star Field?" a professor asked curiously. Dean Xing, he didn't answer. Instead, he closed his eyes and let out a sigh. It seemed that Dean Xing, he didn't want to say anything more about this matter. "Sir Dean, don't worry. We will definitely take good care of your little granddaughter," Professor Shen Wu said indifferently. Dean Xing, he didn't have any relatives. The only thing he was concerned about was a little girl he brought back from a habitable planet when he went out 1,000 years ago. The little girl's name was Yu Yinxi. This little girl was especially strange. 1,000 years had passed, but she still looked like she was 8 or 9 years old. She didn't grow up at all. However, her appetite was extremely shocking. Ordinary families couldn't afford to raise her. Hearing Professor Shenwu's words, Dean Xingyi opened his eyes and looked at Professor Shenwu with a grateful gaze. This was already Dean Xingyi's last look. Professor Shen Wu's appearance slowly became blurred in his eyes. The light also became dimmer and dimmer. In the end, it was darkness. A moment later, Dean Xingyi's body lost all signs of life. Facing Dean Xingyi's corpse, the professors bowed. Being brought out of the Superstar Academy by Dean Xingyi's female assistant, the little girl in red who was shopping in the mall suddenly cried. This little girl had long red hair. This red hair wasn't the red of the Jade Sun clan, but a golden color in the red. Her pair of eyes were a very beautiful sapphire blue. She looked very cute. People who passed by her couldn't help but take a look. Although 1,000 years had passed, not only did Yu Yinxi's body not grow, her intelligence also stopped at 8 or 9 years old. In these 1,000 years, Dean Xingyi often observed the cells in her body and found that there were no signs of aging. It was as if the passage of time didn't have any effect on her body. Dean Xingyi had lived for a very long time. When he was young, he naturally had women and children. However, after a long time, his women and children had all left the world. The people of the current Xingyi family didn't know how many generations had passed. Many years ago, Dean Xingyi had cut off his connection with the family. Yu Yinxi had become Dean Xingyi's only relative. "What's wrong?" Seeing Yu Yinxi crying, the female assistant came in front of her and squatted down to ask. "Grandpa's gone. Sob, sob, sob." When Yu Yinxi said this, the female assistant's eyes also turned red. Bringing Yu Yinxi out was also Dean Xingyi's idea, because Dean Xingyi didn't want her to see his death. However, after Dean Xingyi passed away, Yu Yinxi still felt it. "Yinxi, don't cry. Everyone has such a day. Grandpa will look at you from afar." The female assistant kept comforting her. Chapter 484. After Principal Xingyi passed away, his body was sent to a special teleportation disc. When the blue light of the disc disappeared, Principal Xingyi's body disappeared from the disc and was sent to an unknown space. This was also the tomb of many people after they died, an unknown tomb. Yang Tian obtained the coordinates of Earth, but he didn't know that Principal Xingyi, who told him this information, had already passed away. Creak, creak. When Yang Tian took out the 205th chip, the little blue dragon softly reminded Yang Tian that someone had come. Yang Tian frowned and immediately put the chip away and closed the lid of the storage box. Immediately after, he kept the auxiliary bell and data tower into his storage bracelet. At this time, the array on the stone door of this room began to fluctuate. Yang Tian couldn't help but smile bitterly, thinking that he was really unlucky. The stone door hadn't opened yet, so Yang Tian seized the time to hide at the bottom of a storage rack. This was also the only place he could hide now. The storage box at the bottom of the storage rack was about 2 feet from the ground and was several meters wide. Not to mention one person, even 5 or 6 people could hide inside. However, if the person who came and noticed something and bent down to search, they would be able to see him. When Yang Tian just did well, the stone door opened with a ka sound. 2 high priests walked in one after the other. Although he had already activated the array to hide his aura, Yang Tian was still a bit nervous. He held his breath and tried to calm his mind. Which chip is the one that records the duties? I forgot. The voice of one of the high priests sounded. The other high priest said, the 99th. Immediately after, a ka sound was heard and the storage box was opened. Every time Yang Tian took out the chip, he was very careful and tried to place it in the original position. At this time, when the storage box was opened, he was the most nervous, because the temperature inside the storage box was different from the temperature outside because it was sealed for a long time. Although the difference was slight, if one was careful, they would still notice it. Fortunately, such a thing didn't happen. One of the archpriests took away the number 99 chip and put it into the ancillary device that he had brought, changing the record inside. Xingyi, this little fellow, is truly a pity. If he was able to place his mind on cultivation, he would have long become a great priest. Yes, if we don't succeed in our research this time, we'll be like him soon and leave this world forever. The older we get, the more nostalgic we become. Isn't that so? It is said that we old fellows have lived for so many years and are the least afraid of death. But who knows? We fear death even more than the young ones. Hearing up to here, Yang Tian finally understood. So it turned out that Dean Xing had passed away, and these 2 high priests who came in were changing the job information stored on the crystal chip. Regular guards and divine generals were not qualified to be recorded on the chip. Otherwise, with so many people joining, leaving, and dying every day in the superstar divine temple, even if the 2 great priests were to keep watch here, they would not be able to cope. Hearing that Dean Xing had passed away, Yang Tian was also very sad. In his mind, an amiable old man involuntarily appeared. This old man's eyes were emitting the light of wisdom at all times. The 2 high priests who came in did not only come here to do this one thing. After finishing changing the job information, they opened another storage box. Inside the storage box, it was full of cylindrical transparent bottles that were the thickness of a finger. Inside were turbid, translucent liquids. Yang Tian was unable to see, but listening to the 2 people's conversation, he knew what they were taking out next. It was actually bug milk, a kind of thing produced from the body of an insect mother, used to give birth to guard insects. The 2 people took a bottle in order to catalyze a newly created bug-shaped life form. The Superstar Divine Temple's high priests were also doing biochemical research. Yang Tian somewhat did not believe what he heard. But combining the information he knew, Yang Tian guessed that this must be related to that headless corpse. After taking a bottle of bug milk, the 2 high priests left the storage room and closed the door. Although the 2 high priests left, after waiting for a full 10 minutes, the little blue dragon felt that the 2 people were far away. Only then did Yang Tian crawl out from under the storage shelf. He had already copied the 205th chip. Yang Tian opened the storage box again and started copying from the 206th chip. After more than 3 hours, all the chips in the storage box were copied. Yang Tian originally planned to leave immediately after the copying was completed. But Yang Tian was very curious about the bug milk. With the help of the strange program, he opened the storage box containing the bug milk. Inside the storage box, there were all cylindrical transparent containers that were arranged very neatly. Each one was about 10 centimeters long. When the lid was opened, Yang Tian could feel that the transparent containers were emitting faint energy fluctuations. Yang Tian only took a glance before taking a deep breath and closing the lid. According to the two high priests, some people in the temple were now doing research. It was possible that they would use the bug milk again in a short period of time. If he took one of them, he would definitely be discovered. Although it was a good thing, Yang Tian had to give up and close the lid. Next, Yang Tian went back the way he came. When he was outside, Yang Tian waited for half a day at the vent. Finally, it was time for the change of guard. He returned to the great universe palace without anyone noticing. After entering his room, Yang Tian checked a strand of hair placed on the door. When he found that the door was not opened, he was finally relieved. Now that he had the coordinates of Earth, the next step was to find a way to take Qin Fei away from the superstar divinity temple. This matter was 10,000 times more troublesome than entering the builder's palace. In order to not let Qin Fei worry, Yang Tian immediately wrote a note and asked the little blue dragon to bring it to Qin Fei. The matter of leaving had to be discussed at length. The Temple of Eternal Life was the name given by goddess Shi Chun for the newly built temple. It symbolized immortality. The overall structure of this temple was similar to the Superstar Divinity Temple, but it was larger. The Goddess Palace of the Superstar Divinity Temple was just a symbol, while the Goddess Palace of the Temple of Eternal Life was a symbol of great power and status. Therefore, the Goddess Palace was the largest and most exquisite palace in the entire Temple of Eternal Life. While Yang Tian was worrying about how to take Qin Fei away from the Superstar Divinity Temple, in the Goddess Palace of the Temple of Eternal Life, 100 tall young men in white armor were prostrating on the ground. These 100 young men were only in the Star Realm. The strongest cultivator among them was only in the Star Realm. Goddess Shi Chun was dressed in a black robe and sat on a high seat. She glanced at the crowd indifferently and said to the 100 people prostrating below, "Now, I will bestow you with great power." After saying that, Goddess Shi Chun waved her hand, and 100 red liquid droplets were released from her hand and accurately dripped onto the heads of the 100 people below. Chapter 485. The red droplets that came out of Goddess Shi Chun's hand looked like drops of blood. When the red droplets landed on the heads of the young people prostrating on the ground, their bodies started to tremble. The red droplets quickly seeped into their scalps. No matter what color their hair was before, at this moment, all of them slowly turned dark red. In addition to the 100 young people in the hall, there were dozens of higher-level powerhouses in the hall. Gao Yuan and Grandfather Hong were among them. Both of them couldn't help but frown when they saw the young people undergoing the baptism of eternal life. It wasn't that they were disgusted by the baptism, but what was about to happen was a little cruel. Even so, it was the young people's choice. The Eternal Temple didn't force them. In fact, there were more cultivators who wanted to undergo the baptism. The 100 young people in the hall were only a small part of them. The baptism wasn't a 100% success rate for these Stargrade cultivators. At least 80% of them would be eliminated. Those who persevered would be able to rise from the Stargrade to the Superstar realm. This method of raising one's cultivation level was simply incredible. It could only be described as a miracle. It should be known that under normal circumstances, a Stargrade cultivator would need at least 100 years or even 1,000 years to advance from the Stargrade warrior level to the Superstar level. Furthermore, this was only possible when one had sufficient cultivation resources. At this moment, Grand Duke Hong glanced at the high and mighty goddess. When the goddess had been in the Superstar Divine Temple, she had been so gentle and kind. She had warmed people's hearts with just a smile. She was like a true goddess. Now, however, she had become cold and unfeeling. However, this kind of coldness was necessary. She had to do this for the sake of her goal. Grandfather Hong only glanced at Goddess Shi Chun. His emotions were in turmoil. Then, he turned his attention to the young man in silver armor in the hall. Many people couldn't bear the pain and were panting heavily. Some of them were scratching the ground with their hands, making a series of scratching sounds. Grandfather Hong had experienced this kind of pain before. He and his good friend Gao Yuan had also undergone the baptism. Although it was called a baptism, it was actually using the outsider's body cells to combine with their own cells. The outsider's body cells contained powerful energy. The energy contained in a single cell was enough to make an ordinary human reach the superstar realm. Grandfather Hong and Gao Yuan were originally great star lords. Now they were already great star gods. Their cultivation level was a small matter. As time passed, the cells in their body would be changed even more. They would be able to break through the great star gods and reach a higher level. At that time, a wider world would be revealed before their eyes. If they were successful, they would be promoted and their strength would increase. If they failed, they would be turned into a pile of rotten meat. After countless experiments, the result was that the higher the realm, the higher the chance of success of the baptism, the star grade of the star grade. At this time, not only had the hair of the 100 silver-armored youths turned red, but their skin had also turned red. It was as if their skin had been heated red. During this process, powerful energy fluctuations were emitted from these people, making them look very messy. Roar! Suddenly, a young man could no longer endure the pain and let out a beast-like roar. Immediately after, his skin and flesh began to melt like wax under high temperature. Without the support of his body, the armor on his body automatically disintegrated. The first loser appeared. Oh, oh, oh. Then the second one, the third one. The sounds they made were like the cries of beasts. Their cries contained unwillingness and despair, but there was nothing they could do. They could only accept the fate of death. The longer he persisted in this process, the greater his chances of success. About half an hour later, there were only 18 silver-armored young men left in the hall. After going through a round of pain, these 18 people finally passed the most difficult hurdle. The energy fluctuations emanating from their bodies gradually stabilized. The color of their skin also gradually returned to normal. Previously, their skin was white and their skin was black. Apart from the increase in their cultivation levels, there was no change in their physical appearance. The 18 people who had completed their advancement stood up one after another and stood to the side. The large area where they had been crawling was filled with messy armor parts and pools of dark red sticky liquid. Not only had the flesh and blood of these losers melted, even their bones had disappeared. The red liquid gave off an unpleasant fishy smell. Immediately, dozens of silver-armored soldiers walked in and quickly cleaned up the hall. This was not the first time such a baptism had happened. In the past 10 days, more than 5,000 young cultivators had undergone this baptism. Among the 5,000 people, there were more than 900 superstar cultivators. Lady Goddess, this is already the last batch of people. Please instruct us, Goddess. After the hall was cleaned up, a middle-aged man stood out and bowed to Goddess Shi-chun and said loudly. The Shi-chun goddess smiled and raised her hand. Soon, the 900 superstar cultivators who had undergone the baptism quickly walked into the hall. They knelt on one knee and bowed to the high and mighty goddess Shi-chun. Looking at the 900 superstar cultivators below, Goddess Shi-chun said indifferently, "You have all accepted the baptism of eternal life. From now on, the Great Star God Realm is no longer the final realm for you. You have the opportunity to be like this universe, eternal life." Ha! 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 The 900 superstar cultivators raised their hands and laughed excitedly. After the 900 superstar cultivators calmed down, Goddess Shi-chun stood up and pointed forward. In the direction she was pointing at, the superstar god temple was quite a distance away. The little blue dragon went out and quickly brought back a note written by Qin Fei. When Qin Fei found out that Yang Tian had found the coordinates of Earth, she was very happy. At the same time, she reminded Yang Tian that there was no need to rush the rest of the matters and that he needed to take it slow. This was because Yang Tian's realm was still very far from those priests and great priests. Qin Fei was also worried that Yang Tian would become hot-headed after obtaining Earth's coordinates and do something dangerous. With Yang Tian's current ability, he could bring Qin Fei out of the Superstar Divinity Temple. But what if he left the Superstar Divinity Temple? That would be equivalent to becoming an enemy of the Superstar Divinity Temple. After experiencing so many things, Yang Tian naturally understood this principle. After reading Qin Fei's reply, he smiled and put the note in his storage bracelet. Chapter 486. For the next few months, Yang Tian obediently walked through the various rooms in the Great Universe Palace that stored rune-related items. Yang Tian constantly flipped through a large number of rune books and various fragments with runes engraved on them. When a strange program read the various runes through Yang Tian's vision, it also explained some basic rune knowledge to Yang Tian. Yang Tian also understood runes more and more and remembered many simple runes. Without the strange program's control, he could also accurately inscribe some simple runes with a rune pen. Yang Tian even learned to inscribe some simple rune arrays on his own. For example, rune arrays that could hide one's aura and short-distance teleportation arrays. Of course, Yang Tian only relied on his powerful memory to memorize these rune arrays. In a different environment, it was still somewhat difficult to inscribe rune arrays that could work. The Superstar Divinity Temple also had a gravity room for training. Every 3 days, Yang Tian would enter the gravity room to train for a day. The training process was just like the last time when Yang Tian fought the little blue dragon in the space created by the flying cloud great priest in the meteorite. Although Yang Tian had advanced to the superstar realm and consolidated for a period of time, he was still abused by the little blue dragon. Every time he came out of the gravity room, Yang Tian's body still had scars that had not healed. His long black hair had been burned short by the little blue dragon's dragon flames, and his clothes were full of bright red bloodstains. Yang Tian's crazy training was also to improve his realm as soon as possible. If he advanced to the Great Star Lord realm, Yang Tian was confident that he could take Qin Fei out of the Superstar Divinity Temple. However, there was a problem, and that was that the origin realm in Yang Tian's body was too big. Every time he advanced, he would need at least 5 times the energy of others, and this was only a conservative estimate. When he advanced to the Superstar Warrior realm, Yang Tian would need to consume a Superstar Warrior realm beast core. Then, when he advanced to the Superstar Warrior level, wouldn't he need to consume Superstar King level beast cores? In a universe, the more powerful a mutated beast was, the more intelligent it would be. Superior class, mutated beasts probably had the ability to think like an adult. In addition, their battle prowess was even stronger than human cultivators of the same level. How could they be killed so easily? As time passed, the number of cultivators increased, and the exotic beasts migrated to the distant star fields. It became more and more difficult to obtain high-grade beast cores. Most of the high-grade beast nuclei today were from a long time ago. Yang Tian thought about it and decided that he would have to go to the Superstar Divinity Temple's construction palace. It would be great if he had the inventory of Builder's Palace. That way, he would be able to find out which storage boxes contain more advanced beast cores. If he were to search for them one by one, who knew how long it would take? While Yang Tian was thinking about the construction palace, the 36 high priests in the mystic palace of the Imperial Celestial Great Priest had made a breakthrough in their research. They fused human, beast, and insectoid cells together to cultivate a new type of cell. This type of cell was called protocell. The protocell's ability to fuse was very strong, and it could perfectly fuse with the cells of a headless corpse. However, there was a flaw. After the protocell fused with the cells of a headless corpse, it could only live for about 100 years after mutating. The reason for this result was that Great Priest Tai Yu had designed a very small-time glyph formation to speed up the passage of time. This glyph formation had a very high requirement for the stability of energy. It couldn't be made big enough for cultivators to use, but it could be used on some small cells. After some experiments, it was found that the protocell could be implanted into a cultivator's body. After success, it wouldn't reject the original cells of a human cultivator. On the contrary, as time passed, the protocell would continue to grow and replace the original cells of a human cultivator, thus changing the cell structure of a human cultivator. In other words, the more the protocell replaced the original cells of a human cultivator, the more power it could use. Of course, during this process, it was necessary to replenish energy at the right time and speed up the growth of the protocell in the body. Through this method, the energy contained in the cells of a headless corpse could be used by human cultivators. Of course, this process was also dangerous to a certain extent. After hundreds of experiments, the great priest determined that human cultivators who could withstand the transformation of the protocell had to be at least at the eternal star realm. The higher the realm, the higher the chances of being successfully transformed by the protocell. In fact, the results of the superstar divine temple's research were the same as those of the newly established eternal temple. It was just that goddess Shi Qin's research had been done much earlier, and had already found a solution to the problem of the protocell's insufficient lifespan. The superstar divine temple had obtained the mysterious young man's body, while goddess Shi Qin had obtained the mysterious young man's head. It was precisely because the head and the body existed in this universe at the same time that this powerful body didn't regenerate. For example, the body could regenerate the head, and the head could regenerate the body. Why this mysterious and powerful young man had been killed, apart from a few people at the time, no one knew the answer. They finally came to a conclusion, but a thorny problem immediately arose. The 36 great priests had no choice but to sit together and discuss it again. How we solve this problem? Great priest Empty God glanced at everyone and asked with a frown. The protocell had already been cultivated. As long as it continued to divide and multiply and fuse with the powerful cells of the headless corpse, it could change their current state of life. Of everyone present, the one who was most eager to succeed was Great Priest Empty God. He was already a great star god and wanted to advance further. When Great Priest Empty God asked this question, everyone frowned and pondered. After many days of research, these people looked more like scientists than the developers of high-tech companies outside. I have an idea. The 36 people were silent for more than 10 minutes before Great Priest Kaya said, "The undead." The undead. When everyone heard this, some of the great priests were puzzled. It was obvious that they had never heard of this race. Some of the great priests' eyes lit up. After Great Priest Kaya finished speaking, he paused and said, "The undead are not immortal, but because they live for a long time. They can live for up to 1,000,000 years without cultivation. They have a long life cycle. For the first 200,000 years, they are children. After another 200,000 years, they are teenagers. After 600,000 years, they start to age slowly. There are actually such humans." One of the great priests said in surprise. Great Priest Kaya nodded. "Actually, the undead were created by humans. You may not know this, but it was our seniors from the Superstar Divine Temple who exterminated them." When he said this, Great Priest Kaya shut his mouth. They had exterminated the undead and now needed their help. For these high and mighty great priests, it was a little awkward. Chapter 487. The undead are few in number. How can we find them? Now that the Temple of Eternal Life has appeared, we can't spend too much time looking for them. After Kaya finished speaking, a high priest shook his head. "There's no need to look for them," High Priest Kaya said. "The late Principal Xing Yi found them for us 1,000 years ago. His granddaughter, Yu Shi, is an undead." High Priest Empty God said, "Then let Brilliant Star Guna bring her here." After Principal Xing Yi passed away, Brilliant Star Guna became the new principal of the Superstar Academy. For the students of the Superstar Academy, there were no changes to the academy. Everything was according to the previous rules. For the professors, it was different. Brilliant Star Guna couldn't stand the laziness of some of the professors, so he asked his assistant to make some strict rules for the professors. For example, each professor had to personally teach more than 50 students. The passing rate of these students was a reflection of the professor's ability. At the same time, Brilliant Star Guna also restored the professor's rank system that had been abolished for a long time. The abilities of the professors were divided into 5 levels. The professor with the lowest ability was level 1, and the professor with the highest was level 5. The higher the level of the professors, the better the treatment. Also, without the permission of the principal, the professors were not allowed to leave the academy. As the principal of the Superstar Academy, Brilliant Star Guna had absolute power in the Superstar Academy. And because he was young, the rules he made were very strict. It had to be said that Brilliant Star Guna was a strict person. He also hoped that the professors of the Superstar Academy would act like professors. After coming to the Superstar Academy a few times, Brilliant Star Guna was very dissatisfied with the usual behavior of the professors. He thought that it was because of this reason that the Superstar Academy was providing fewer and fewer talents for the Superstar Temple, and the quality was getting lower and lower. Take the recruitment of the 5 Divine Generals, for example. Before the assessment was completed, he made many students give up the assessment with just a few words. Among the 5 Divine Generals, Brilliant Star Guna only thought that Yang Tian was a qualified talent. The others were too far away. Take Kista, who was sent to 9 Barbarian Star region, for example. Not long after he arrived, he gave the Superstar Temple a big slap in the face. This was because Kista had publicly broken ties with the Superstar God Temple and joined the Eternal Temple. The Superstar Divine Temple had spent a large amount of resources to cultivate such a person. It had to be said that the professors of Superstar Academy were very problematic. After changing the professors, the next step was to strictly control the students. If they wanted to obtain benefits from the academy, they would have to pay a higher price. The newly appointed Brilliant Star Guna was planning on how to make the Superstar Academy look different, when his auxiliary device gave him a notification that the Temple Space Archpriest had sent him a letter. Brilliant Star Guna used to be a divine general under the Great Priest of the Empty God. He respected the Great Priest of the Empty God very much. As soon as he heard the Great Priest of the Empty God's letter, he immediately opened the message on his support device. It was an encrypted voice message. Great Priest Empty God asked Brilliant Star Guna to bring Yu Inshi to Superstar Temple and told him that this matter was very important to the temple. It was related to the survival of the temple. Without any hesitation, Brilliant Star Guna immediately left his office. He summoned a few capable subordinates he had brought to the academy and entered the residence of the professors. Inshi, do you think this is fun? Chu Yin Gaing asked Yu Inshi with a smile as she suspended a ball of soft mud in the air with her mind power and kept changing its shape. Ever since Principal Xingyi had passed away, this cute little girl had become very quiet. She had not smiled for a long time. After Chu Yin Gaing knew about it, she brought Yu Inshi to her residence to take care of her. She usually had nothing to do, so she was playing with Yu Inshi. Looking at the soft mud in the air, Yu Inshi's eyes widened and she nodded. Chu Yin Gaing smiled and turned the soft mud into a smiling face. Seeing this smiling face, Yu Inshi finally smiled happily. At this time, Chu Yin Gaing's auxiliary device notified her, "Master, someone has broken in." When Chu Yin Gaing heard this, she immediately frowned. Pung! At this time, the door downstairs was kicked open. Next, there was a series of thumping sounds. Brilliant Star Guna brought a group of people and directly broke into Chu Yin Gaing's mansion and went to the living room on the 2nd floor. "You, Principal." When she saw Brilliant Star Guna, Chu Yin Gaing wanted to ask him who he was, but she quickly realized what was going on. As soon as Brilliant Star Guna arrived, he set his eyes on Yu Inshi. As soon as Chu Yin Gaing finished her sentence, he waved his hand and said coldly, "Take her away." 2 of Brilliant Star Guna's followers immediately went forward to take Yu Inshi. When Yu Inshi saw how fierce the 2 were, she was so scared that she hid behind Chu Yin Gaing. "Wait!" Chu Yin Gaing shouted coldly. Her powerful spiritual power formed an energy barrier in front of her and blocked the 2 followers of Brilliant Star Guna. When the 2 came into contact with Chu Yin Gaing's spiritual power, they were caught off guard and could not help but take 2 steps back. When Brilliant Star Guna saw that his 2 followers were blocked, He looked at Chu Yin Gang and said calmly, "The temple needs her." When Chu Yin Gang heard that the superstar temple needed Yu Inshi, she was confused and said, "She is just a little girl without any power. Why would the superstar temple need her?" Brilliant Star Guna said coldly, "This is the temple's business. I do not need to explain it to you." After saying that, he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. Chu Yin Gang's spiritual power was easily disintegrated. The powerful rebounding force caused Chu Yin Gang to take a few steps back. Brilliant Star Guna's two followers took the opportunity to rush forward. One of them reached for Chu Yin Gang's neck in an attempt to restrain her, while the other aimed at Yuanxi. These two were peak Starray cultivators and were much stronger than Chu Yin Gang. They had only been pushed back because they had not noticed it. Now that they had made a move, Chu Yin Gang could not resist at all. Bang! Bang! Suddenly, two consecutive bangs were heard. The two people who had pounced on Chu Yin Gang and Yu Inshi were sent flying by the powerful force. Their bodies smashed through several walls of the villa, creating two big holes. This process was extremely short. It only took an instant. When Chu Yin Gang came back to her senses, she found that Professor Shenwu was already standing beside her. "Professor Shenwu, don't forget that you are also a member of the Superstar Temple. This is an order from the higher-ups." Brilliant Star Guna clenched his fists and said coldly when he saw Professor Shenwu suddenly appear. Brilliant Star Guna had long been dissatisfied with Professor Shenwu and this group of old people. Professor Shenwu sighed when he saw Brilliant Star Guna's overbearing manner and said, "This old man promised Dean Xingyi that I would take good care of his little granddaughter. Therefore, you cannot take her away." Chapter 488. It seemed that taking Yu Inshi to the Superstar Divinity Temple would be a bit troublesome. Brilliant Star Guna looked at the professor coldly. "Are you going to betray the Superstar Divinity Temple?" The professor snorted in disdain. "Not letting you take Inshi away and betraying the Superstar Divinity Temple are two different things." What the professor meant was, as the humans on Earth would say, "Don't put a label on yourself. Then, don't blame me for taking it by force." Seeing that Professor Shenwu was dead set on not agreeing, Yao Xing Guna clenched his teeth. "Young man, you're too impulsive." Brilliant Star Guna was about to attack when an old man's voice suddenly sounded. Then, a black shadow flashed and appeared in the room. It was Professor Fu Wei. If the professor was alone, Brilliant Star Guna was confident that he could take Yu Inshi away. Although he wasn't confident that he could defeat the professor, he could pin him down so that his subordinates could take Yu Inshi away. But now that Professor Fu Wei was here, he wasn't confident at all. Looking at the furious Brilliant Star Guna who was about to explode, Professor Fu Wei smiled and said, "The Academy forbids internal fights. Are you going to break the rules, Serene?" Brilliant Star Guna said proudly, "The rules of the Academy are made by people. Of course, they can be changed." Professor Fu Wei shook his head and looked at the professor. "It seems that we can't stay in the Superstar Academy any longer. Let's go." The professor of Shinwa nodded. The two of them each took one of Yu Inshi's hands and jumped. With a loud bang, the roof of the villa where Chu Yin and Gang lived had a huge hole in it. Brilliant Star Guna narrowed his eyes and said, "Chase." His voice was still echoing in the room, but he had already disappeared. Then, the 6 subordinates of Brilliant Star Guna followed. Chu Yin Gang frowned and immediately followed. In fact, it wasn't just the 2 professors who wanted to leave the academy. Even Chu Yin Gang wanted to leave. Ever since Dean Xingyi left, some people who were jealous of her reported to the academy's administration office that she was an idler raised by the academy. Although the academy didn't allow Chu Yin and Guing to leave immediately, their authority had been reduced by quite a bit. When Headmaster Xingyi had been here, Chu Yin and Guing had received the same treatment as the professors. But now, they couldn't even compare to a low-level student. Even ordering food in the academy had to be paid. The academy was huge. In the past, Chu Yin and Gu Ying only needed to give a call, and a car would be sent to them. But now, no one cared about her anymore. This was only secondary. The key was that Yang Tian was no longer in the academy. Therefore, Chu Yin and Gu Ying had the idea of leaving the academy. However, the outside world was very dangerous for her. The group of people who wanted the World Tree Seed would definitely be waiting for her outside the academy. Boom! Just as Chu Yin and Gu Ying left the villa and landed on the empty ground outside, a loud sound came from the sky. Immediately after, Professor Xinwu and Professor Fu Wei brought the little girl Yu Inshi down from the sky. With glorious star Guna's cultivation, there was no way he could stop the two professors from leaving. The one who had forced the two of them down was a great shaman. Great Priest Lin Kai. Professor Xinwu could not help but exclaim in surprise when he saw an old man hovering in the sky. Professor Xinwu and Professor Fu Wei were both from the Superstellar Divinity Temple, so they naturally knew who this great shaman was. Great Priest Lin Kai appeared in front of them and asked with a serious face, "The two of you have gone too far. Are you thinking of leaving the temple?" Faced with Great Priest Lin Kai's question, both Professor Xinwu and Professor Fu Wei were silent. Glorious Star Guna. Great Priest Lin Kai gave Professor Xinwu and Professor Fu Wei a displeased look, then turned to Glorious Star Guna. Facing the Great Priest of the temple, Glorious Star Guna was not as arrogant as before. He bowed and said, "Great Priest, what is it?" Looking at the obedient Glorious Star Guna, Great Priest Lin Kai said, "Don't cross the line." "Yes." Glorious Star Guna had no objections and nodded. Then, High Priest Lin Kai waved her hand and shook Professor Xinwu and Professor Fu Wei a few steps away. She squatted down and pulled up one of Yu Inshi's small hands. She inserted a syringe into one of Yu Inshi's arms and drew out a tube of blood. Yu Inshi could only grit her teeth and endure the whole process because she could not move at all. After putting away the syringe, Great Priest Lin Kai said to the confused Professor Xinwu and Professor Fu Wei, "The temple will not do anything to her. Why are you so nervous? One tube of this blood is enough." After saying that, High Priestess Lin Kai turned around. With a flash, she turned into a ray of light and disappeared into the sky. At the level of the Great Priest of the Superstar Divinity Temple, she did not even need a teleportation circle. She could travel countless light years in an instant. Phew! After Great Priest Lin Kai left, Professor Xinwu and Professor Fu Wei both let out a sigh of relief. If Great Priest Lin Kai wanted to take Yu Inshi away by force, they would not be able to stop her. Professor Xinwu looked at Glorious Star Guna and said to Professor Fu Wei, "Let's go." They were determined to leave the Superstar Academy. Unless the temple changed the current dean of the Superstar Academy, they might consider staying. In their eyes, Glorious Star Guna's approach was not completely wrong. The academy did need some changes. It was just that they were not used to such changes. The two professors were about to leave again when Glorious Star Guna moved and blocked their way. "What do you want, Glorious Star Guna?" Professor Xinwu frowned. Glorious Star Guna smiled and said, "If you want to leave the Superstar Academy, I will not stop you, but I must remind you that without the Superstar Divinity Temple, you would not be here." After saying this, Brilliant Star Guna flashed to the side. Glorious Star Guna thought that the two professors would go to the Temple of Eternal Life after leaving the Superstar Academy. The two professors didn't want to explain anything about this. "Professors, wait," Chu Yin Gang said. The two professors turned around and looked at Chu Yin Gang. "I want to leave with you. You are both men, and it is not convenient for you to take care of Inshi," Chu Yin Gang said. Professor Xinwu knew that Chu Yin Gang came from the Death Star Field, and they were preparing to go there. This was what Dean Xingyi reminded them before he died. From now on, only the Death Star Field, that godforsaken place, would be peaceful. Professor Xinwu looked at Yu Inshi and nodded to Chu Yin Gang. "Let's go." Chu Yin Gang was right. Yu Inshi did need a woman to take care of her. Seeing that Professor Xinwu agreed, Yu Inshi, who looked 8 or 9 years old, but was actually much older than Chu Yin Gang, smiled happily. She liked Chu Yin Gang very much. Chapter 489. inside the great priest Yu Qin's maze palace. A stellar-level temple guard undergoing the experiment, panted heavily after being injected with the superstar divine temple's newly synthesized protocells. He seemed to be in great pain. At this moment, one could see that his silver-white hair was rapidly turning dark red. It was the same for his skin, which had turned red like a piece of iron that had been heated red. This change was the same as the stellar-level cultivators of the Temple of Eternal Life who had undergone the baptism. The 36 high priests looked at the guard attentively and nervously. Each of them had a grave expression on their faces. This was the sixth guard to undergo the experiment. The first 5 had all failed and turned into a pool of viscous liquid. This was because their body cells had failed to fuse with the protocells. A large number of the cell tissues in their bodies had died, causing their tissues to disintegrate. Of course, the temple guards who underwent this experiment were also forced by the great priest to do so. No one was willing to be a test subject. When the guard's skin changed, a strong and chaotic energy fluctuation was emitted from his body. After about 10 minutes, the guard's skin finally returned to normal. However, his hair was still dark red. At this moment, the energy in his body finally stabilized. Success. He had finally succeeded. Ha ha ha. Great Priest Yu Chan could not help but laugh happily. The guard who had undergone the experiment had successfully advanced to the Superstar Warrior level. Before the experiment, he had only been a stellar-level warlord cultivator. His status in the temple was extremely low. With his cultivation talent, it was estimated that he would not be able to reach the Superstar realm even after a few hundred years. After the success, the happiest person was not the great priests. Instead, it was the guard who had advanced from stellar-level warlord to superstar warrior level in just over 10 minutes. Thank you, great priests. The guard who had successfully advanced was ecstatic. He immediately bowed to the great priests and thanked them. Before the modification experiment, he had been filled with resentment towards the great priests. After the success, the resentment in his heart disappeared completely. It was replaced by gratitude. All right, you may leave first. Great Priest Yu Chun said with a smile. Yes. The guard bowed to Great Priest Yu Chun and then left the laboratory. He quickly left the maze palace. After this guard left, his fortuitous encounter would soon be known by others. Then, more star-level guards would be looking forward to being modified. This was especially true for those guards who had no talent in cultivation and were planning to return home to live a normal life. In this universe, there was no cultivator who did not wish to continuously improve and become a top expert in the universe. The continuous advancement of one's realm also meant that one's lifespan would also be continuously extended. Although the chances of failure were very high if he were to accept the modification, he had to accept it. But before the transformation, no one thought that they would be a failure. After the guard who had been successfully transformed by the protocell left, Great Priest Empty God smiled and said, "Next, should we find some little superclass fellows to be transformed?" A cultivator could only undergo a single transformation. The changes in the body of that divine hall guard who was successfully transformed and left had actually already been recorded. Through the analysis of the highly intelligent program, a lot of important data was obtained. He could only undergo one modification, the appropriate amount of injection, the subsequent changes in the body, the strength of the energy in the body. These data were all simulated by the AI program without any real risk. Great Priest Empty God's suggestion was quickly agreed upon. Half a month later, on the observation platform, the thousands of superclass cultivators who had stayed in the Superstar Divine Temple were gathered here. These thousands of people could be said to be the elites of the younger generation in the Superstar Divine Temple. They were also the future hope of the Superstar Divine Temple. Great Priest Kaya looked at these thousands of people and sighed his heart. Using protocell modification to create a large number of powerful cultivators was clearly an act of short-sightedness. He knew that if things like protocells were to spread in large numbers, it would have a strong impact on the cultivation of the entire universe. From then on, cultivators only needed to cultivate to the Eternal Star Realm to be able to undergo protocell modification. After that, They did not need to put in much effort. As long as they replenished some energy, as the number of modified cells in their body increased, their realm would continue to steadily increase. What was the point of such cultivation? When the Superstar Divine Temple was established, they strongly opposed the use of technology to create superhumans. Many genius scientists were executed, and some races that had been modified by humans were exterminated. This was to maintain the orthodoxy of the cultivators. But now, the Superstar Divine Temple had no choice but to do so. This was because Goddess Shi-Chun had established the Temple of Eternal Life. As soon as it was established, it used the baptism to create a large number of powerhouses in a short time. Now, the Temple of Eternal Life's power was about to surpass the Superstar Divine Temple. If the Superstar Divine Temple did not change, it would not be long before it was replaced by the Temple of Eternal Life. For the Superstar Divine Temple, this was a matter of great urgency. What they had once insisted on was now being overturned. Great Priest Kaya understood that a great change had begun in the universe. The Superstar Divine Temple they had protected would henceforth lose their faith. It was not just Great Priest Kaya. After a moment of joy, all the great priests on the observation platform had the same thought. Yang Tian was among these thousands of people. He wore a suit of blue armor with a star beast on his shoulder, which was particularly eye-catching. Yang Tian was able to guess the reason why the great shamans had gathered all the super-grade cultivators here. The modification had also surprised Yang Tian. He had thought that his cultivation speed could be said to be extremely terrifying, but he had not expected that after the modification, his cultivation speed would be even faster. It was so fast that it would only take a little more than 10 minutes. In the future, everyone would only need to cultivate to the star grade. After that, they would only need to undergo the modification to reach the heavens in a single bound. This was not right. Yang Tian panicked when he thought of such a situation. A great priest walked to the center of the observation platform and said with a smile, "Perhaps everyone already knows that after the research of the 36 great priests, the Superstar Divine Temple has finally succeeded in developing a type of strengthened cell. It can allow a star-grade cultivator to reach the superstar grade in a short time." As soon as the priest said that, the eyes of the majority of the people present lit up with excitement. After the modification, a star-grade cultivator could become a superstar-grade powerhouse. Then, what about a superstar-grade cultivator? Would they be able to reach the major Star-Lord grade directly? Chapter 490. The priest who had come out to speak was a middle-aged man. At the moment, he was playing the role of a host. After saying his first words, he glanced at the thousands of superstar cultivators. When he saw the excitement and anticipation in most of their eyes, he raised his voice and said, "You guessed right. Superstar cultivators will be able to advance to the Great Star Lord level after being modified. As for the Great Star Lords, they will be able to advance to the Great Star God level after being modified. Once the modification is successful, it won't affect your advancement in the future." "What about the Great Star God level?" someone asked loudly after the middle-aged priest finished speaking. The middle-aged priest smiled mysteriously. "What do you think?" Although he didn't give a direct answer, his mysterious smile revealed a lot of information. Next, the middle-aged priest called out the 3 guards who had been successfully modified more than 10 days ago. Before the modification, the 3 of them had been stellar warriors. But now, they were already superstar warrior-level powerhouses. After the first stellar warrior guard was successfully modified, dozens of others took the initiative to ask to be modified. In total, a total of 32 star warrior-level temple guards had been transformed, and only 3 of them had succeeded. A success rate of about 10% was already pretty good. Yang Tian frowned as he looked at the 3 people. This was the first time Yang Tian had seen a modified person. Their hair was all dark red, which made them look a little evil. It wasn't just their appearance that gave people this feeling. The aura they emitted was also very aggressive. After the 3 of them came out, the middle-aged priest introduced them to everyone. Not only have the 3 of them advanced, but they also have combat power that surpasses cultivators of the same level. If you don't believe me, you can compare notes with them. When the middle-aged priest said cultivators of the same level, he meant cultivators who had relied on their own efforts to become superstar cultivators. Such a comparison was tantamount to a collision of strength between a traditional cultivator and a modified cultivator. As soon as the middle-aged priest finished speaking, the three modified cultivators' eyes were filled with excitement. They were very confident in their sudden increase in strength. Not only had their strength increased, but their recovery ability was also stronger than other people's. Of course, the other people referred to traditional cultivators. The three of them had already performed in front of the 36 high priests. One of them had his arm cut off, but it had recovered very quickly. After the fierce battle, they had also found that their strength had increased by quite a bit. The three of them were confident that their combat power could be compared to superstar warriors of the traditional cultivators. After the middle-aged priest finished speaking, he retreated to the side and left the open space for the three modified cultivators. Who will fight us? After the middle-aged priest walked to the side, no one came forward for a long time. One of the modified men said loudly with a disdainful smile on his face, "I'll do it." As soon as he finished speaking, a person who was not convinced walked out of the crowd and stood more than 30 meters away from the three of them. Two of the three remodelers immediately retreated. This was a one-on-one spar. The one who came out to fight was a superstar warrior. He was wearing the standard black armor of the Superstar Divinity Temple. He had a strong body and light blue short hair. That's right, Superstar Warrior. After standing still, this immortal general with light blue short hair reported his name and cultivation base. Neri, Superstar Warrior level. The modified man who had provoked him earlier also reported his name and level. The armor on Neri's body was also a standard black armor. The Superstar Divine Temple was very big and could hold tens of millions of people. With so many people, other than a few great priests who were known by everyone, the other guards, divine generals, and ordinary priests were not famous in the Superstar Divine Temple. It could be said that the two of them had never met before. After reporting their names and realms according to the rules, the two of them slowly backed away. When Superstar Realm cultivators fought, they needed a lot of space. They could cross hundreds of thousands of meters in an instant. The two of them finally stopped about 100 meters apart. At this time, everyone's eyes were on the two of them, guessing the result. This competition would determine who had the advantage between the traditional cultivators and the modified cultivators. The most direct reaction was combat power. The great priests had made this decision after careful consideration. Because there were so many people in the Superstar Divine Temple, even some of the great priests were repulsed by this kind of modification. There were even more people below them. Among them, the most important were the Superstar Realm cultivators. Cultivators below the Star Realm, including those at the Star Realm, were still in the initial stages of the whole cultivation process. It was very easy to change their way of thinking. The high-ranking great priests and great priests had lived for many years and had become wily old foxes. At the same time, they also held the ruling power of the Superstar Divine Temple. Although some people were repulsed by the change, they would ultimately choose to compromise in the face of power. These Superstar Realm Divine Generals were neither high nor low in status, and they were the backbone of the Superstar Divine Temple. They were at the stage where their thoughts were the most active and changeable. If they were not convinced, the Superstar Divine Temple would be in danger of collapsing. The most direct way to convince these Superstar Divine Generals was to use combat power to conquer them. I will be very heavy-handed. Don't blame me if I accidentally destroy your body, the red-haired Neri said with a smile after the two of them stood still. Nair, who was about to fight him, curled his lips and said disdainfully, "Don't be so confident. If you can kill me, I have nothing to say." The conversation between the two of them reached everyone's ears and made them feel very uncomfortable. This was especially true for the thousands of Superstar Divine Generals. Neri looked down on these cultivators, who had cultivated to the Superstar Realm through continuous effort. After the two of them finished speaking, They looked at each other quietly. The entire observatory became very quiet all of a sudden. After about a minute, the two of them suddenly moved. In Yang Tian's eyes, the two of them threw themselves at each other at the same time and past each other. It was only then that a sound was transmitted to his ears. It was a very ear-piercing sound. Sigh. After seeing their movements clearly, Yang Tian shook his head and sighed. Nair was defeated. Yang Tian saw the entire process clearly. When the two of them met, Nair's fist energy could not even break through Neri's energy defense. Neri's hand quickly swept across Nair's neck. It was very fast. His strength was also very strong. Pong! When the two of them passed each other and stopped, Nair clutched his neck and fell. His heavy body stiffly hit the ground. Chapter 491. Nair couldn't even take a single blow. Wasn't this guy's combat strength too strong? Everyone was astonished. What was even more surprising was that Nair, who had fallen to the ground, didn't move at all for a long time. This was very abnormal. Cultivators above the star state should be able to reform their bodies after death, as long as their bodies weren't completely destroyed. However, not only was Nair's body motionless, but his life aura was also rapidly weakening. In the end, he completely disappeared. It was obvious that he was completely dead. Neri glanced at Nair's corpse and said with a smile, "I forgot to tell you that the people we kill leave behind a special kind of energy in their bodies. This kind of energy prevents the cells from replicating. In other words, the people we kill can't be reborn." As soon as he said this, everyone couldn't help but feel fear. Who would dare fight a modified person like him? If they failed, they would die immediately. It was supposed to be a spar, but it had turned into a battle of life and death. Who else? After Nair's corpse was cleaned up, Neri glanced at everyone with a smile on his face and asked faintly. The energy in Neri's body was similar to Yang Tian's origin power. It was just that the body eroded by his energy wouldn't melt, so it didn't look as scary. After Neri's words, even after a long time, no one dared to step forward to accept the challenge. As Neri glanced around, time passed by minute. Soon, about 3 minutes had passed. In terms of aura, Neri suppressed everyone. Yang Tian glanced at the great shamans. These high and mighty great shamans all had cold expressions on their faces. Neri laughed loudly when he saw that no one dared to accept the challenge. He looked very arrogant. The middle-aged priest walked over at this time and opened his arms to the thousands of superstar cultivators. He smiled and said, "Did you see that? After being modified, not only will your combat strength increase, but you will also have a special kind of power. Don't you want to have this kind of power?" Many people frowned when they heard the middle-aged priest's passionate words. This was too despicable. Why didn't he say so before the spar? He had let Nair die in vain. After the middle-aged priest finished speaking, he glanced at everyone and said with a smile, "Superstar warlords can also come and give it a try." As soon as the middle-aged priest finished speaking, everyone was shocked again. This was clearly the rhythm of a challenge. "What? You don't dare?" Neri crossed his arms and sneered. A dozen days ago, Neri had still been a star-grade cultivator. However, he was now openly challenging a superstar warlord. This change made many people unhappy. At the same time, they felt very conflicted. It wasn't easy to cultivate from the eternal star realm to the superstar realm. However, the other party only used a little more than 10 days. Should he also give up his current cultivation method and accept the transformation? Rather than saying that it was a conflict, it was more accurate to say that the hearts of the superstar realm cultivators began to waver. After the modification, he would be able to rise from the superstar state to the Star-Lord state. Neri, this guy, will be far surpassed by me again. The shamans noticed the change in everyone's expression. The middle-aged shaman patted Neri's shoulder and nodded to him before standing outside the arena again. But after 5 minutes, no one stepped forward. At this moment, the balance in the hearts of nearly 1,000 superhumans had already started to tilt toward accepting the transformation. During these 5 minutes, Yang Tian was actually very conflicted. The idea of accepting the transformation had never appeared in Yang Tian's mind. What he was hesitating about was whether he should go out and kill Neri to give the traditional cultivators a shot of confidence. However, he also remembered that not all of these traditional cultivators had advanced as quickly as he had. If most of them didn't accept the transformation, they probably wouldn't be able to reach the Star Lord state until they died. Or accepting the transformation was also a kind of cultivation. There had never been a shortcut in this world. There would definitely be some consequences if one advanced rapidly. It was just that no one had discovered it yet. Many thoughts filled Yang Tian's mind. For a moment, Yang Tian couldn't tell what was right and what was wrong. However, this Neri had to be killed. Yang Tian narrowed his eyes and was about to walk out when suddenly someone shouted, "I'll do it." Yang Tian turned his head and looked in the direction of the voice. It was a middle-aged man with long hair wearing red armor. He wasn't very tall, but from the energy waves radiating from him, he was a superstar warrior state cultivator. Although this person wasn't very big, he wasn't weak. The power of cultivators wasn't just physical strength. Seeing that someone had come out to fight, Neri's eyes were filled with battle intent. Today was his chance to perform. As long as he did what the high priest wanted, he would definitely get a good job in the superstar divinity temple in the future. The middle-aged man stood about 50 meters away from Neri. He raised his hand and pointed at Neri and the other two modifiers behind him. The three of you have been modified. It can't be that only Neri has this kind of combat power, right? Find someone else. Neri heard this and frowned. He originally wanted to defeat this superstar warrior state cultivator and show his power again. But he didn't expect that the other party wouldn't even spar with him. "Are you afraid of me?" Neri sneered. He wanted to anger this middle-aged man. The middle-aged man shook his head. "I'm not afraid of you. I just want to make sure that the combat power of the three of you is about the same. That's more convincing, isn't it? If the combat power of the three of you is about the same, I'm willing to accept the temple's arrangement. If it's not..." At this point, the middle-aged man didn't continue. His meaning was obvious. "Neri, let me do it." At this time, one of the other two stood up and walked to Neri's side with a smile. Neri looked at the high priest who was acting as the host and saw the high priest nod at him. "Okay," Neri said helplessly. He retreated to the side. "My name is Chopper, Superstar Warrior State," the new high priest said to the middle-aged man with long hair. The middle-aged man was about to speak when suddenly a faint voice sounded in everyone's ears. "Yang Tian, Superstar Warrior State." The stargazing platform was already covered by the rune formation. When Yang Tian spoke, he used a powerful mind power. Therefore, his voice sounded very loud in everyone's ears. As soon as Yang Tian finished speaking, a group of people suddenly walked into the platform. Hong Yujio took the lead, and Qin Fei came to the stargazing platform, surrounded by a group of white-robed maids. Chapter 492. Hong Yujio was the high priest in charge of the goddess palace. Without his guidance, Qin Fei would not have been able to reach the observatory. Now that the observatory was shrouded in rune array energy, it was forbidden to enter. Outside the observatory, there were many people. There were also many cultivators gathered outside the palaces that were lower in elevation. All the cultivators in the temple knew that the Superstar Divine Temple was about to change and wanted to witness it with their own eyes. Unfortunately, the people outside the observatory could only vaguely see what was going on inside, but could not hear what was going on inside. Of course, Qin Fei wanted to witness such a big event. Moreover, she knew that Yang Tian was also on the observatory. Hong Yujio could not refuse the goddess' request. Seeing Qin Fei, Yang Tian was also surprised and delighted. Although they had been secretly contacting each other, he had never seen her with his own eyes. "Greetings, goddess." Although the current goddess didn't have any authority in the Superstar Divine Temple, she had an extremely high status. She still had to show proper etiquette. When the high priest saw Qin Fei arrive, they all bowed and greeted her. Qin Fei was wearing a gorgeous black robe. Her expression was very solemn. Seeing that everyone was bowing, she elegantly raised her hand. Everyone then straightened up. Yang Tian's vanity was greatly satisfied. This honorable goddess was his wife. Qin Fei did not walk to the center of the observatory. Instead, she sat on the periphery of the observatory, as if she was watching a show. When Qin Fei arrived, Yang Tian also walked to the center. Hong Yuzhou stood beside Qin Fei and looked deeply at Yang Tian. Seeing Hong Yuzhou look at him, High Priest Yang Tian smiled. After bowing to the goddess, everyone once again focused on the three transformed cultivators, Yang Tian and the long-haired middle-aged man. At this moment, these five people were undoubtedly the focus of everyone's attention. Yang Tian suddenly stood out, which surprised many people. "Who are you?" The long-haired middle-aged man looked at Yang Tian with some dissatisfaction and asked in a somewhat stiff tone. The middle-aged man's long hair was light blue, like most races. His red armor and slightly upturned eyes made him look a little demonic. Yang Tian understood this person's feelings. If it was him, he would also be unhappy at this moment. He smiled and said, "Letting a superstar warrior-level expert like you fight is really a waste of talent. Let me deal with him first. If I can't win, then you can go." Yang Tian spoke very politely. When a middle-aged man with long hair heard this, he frowned and turned his head to look to the side. This person was looking in the direction of the middle-aged priest who had stood up to preside over this special gathering. The middle-aged priest nodded. "All right." After receiving the agreement, the man said a few words before leaving the square and standing to the side. Who was Yang Tian? Many people had never heard of the name Yang Tian, so they asked the people around them. However, other than a few people from the Great Universe Palace, no one knew anything about Yang Tian. The previous Divine General Recruitment Assessment wasn't a big deal for these Divine Generals, so they naturally didn't pay attention to it. These superstar Divine Generals didn't know about Yang Tian, but the High Priests were very familiar with Yang Tian. This was because a while ago, the name Yang Tian often appeared in their ears. These High Priests were very surprised to see Yang Tian stand up. In their impression, Yang Tian was a very low-key person. He was capable, but he always hid in the Great Universe Palace and didn't like to show off like others. He deliberately attracted their attention. Of course, they didn't know that Yang Tian had already done something big for the Superstar Divine Temple. The Architect Palace's defenses were very tight, but Yang Tian had still managed to sneak in without anyone noticing. If they knew that Yang Tian was constantly thinking about taking away the treasures of the Architect Palace and taking away the goddess, who knew how they would feel. In fact, the one who was the most surprised and puzzled was High Priest Taiyu. The Tao of runes and cultivation were two different things. He hoped that one day, Yang Tian would inherit his mantle. But now Yang Tian had suddenly stood up. This was simply too reckless. High Priest Taiyu was very clear about the strength of Neri and the other two, and was worried that Yang Tian wouldn't be their match. In his mind, if Yang Tian failed, it would be the same as losing a rune genius. Yang Tian is only a superstar warrior, but he's so bold. He's young and hot-headed. This is a good chance to show off in front of the High Priests. If I had the confidence, I'd want to do the same. Who do you think will win later? It's most likely Neri. He's too strong, and the energy in his body is too strange. One has to be on guard against such a person at all times. The discussion on the observatory grew louder and louder. Yang Tian, get down. High Priest Taiyu finally couldn't hold back and said in a deep voice. Yang Tian glanced at High Priest Taiyu gratefully. He knew that High Priest Taiyu was concerned about him, but he stubbornly shook his head. I want everyone to see that the power we cultivate through our own efforts is not inferior to the modified ones. Do you have the ability to do so? Neri sneered as soon as Yang Tian finished speaking. Whether I have the ability or not, you'll find out soon enough. Ming Tian smirked and said. In Neri's eyes, Yang Tian's smile was full of contempt. Neri clenched his teeth and coldly said, Chop Bei, kill him. Yang Tian ignored Neri and pointed at another modified cultivator whose name he didn't know. What's his name? Chop Bei didn't answer Yang Tian's question. The modified cultivator pointed at by Yang Tian answered himself. My name is Yasi, a superstar warrior. Yang Tian, do you want to fight me? Qin Fei raised her head and looked at Hong Yujio. High Priest, can Yang Tian defeat them? Hong Yujio shook his head. I think Yang Tian will win. Qin Fei felt relieved after hearing Hong Yujio's words. To Qin Fei, although Hong Yujio was annoying at times because he watched her too closely, she had to admit that Hong Yujio's eyes were very sharp, as if he could see through everything. Yasi, Chop Bei, and Neri come at me together. I don't want to waste time. After dealing with you guys, I still have things to do. Yang Tian rubbed his nose and said with a smile, This is too arrogant. Yang Tian actually wanted to fight 1 against 3, even if it was 1-on-1. In the eyes of others, Yang Tian didn't have the confidence to win. He actually wanted to fight 1 against 3. Yang Tian's words clearly showed that he didn't care about the 3 of them. Yasi, Chop Bei, and Neri all had angry expressions on their faces. At this moment, the little blue dragon that had been lying on Yang Tian's shoulder moved and cried out excitedly. At this moment, everyone noticed the little blue dragon on Yang Tian's shoulder. It turned out that it wasn't a decoration on Yang Tian's blue armor. Chapter 493. The little blue dragon had been coiled up on Yang Tian's shoulder, not moving at all. With its small body, the blue color on its body wasn't that different from Yang Tian's blue armor. It really did look like an armor decoration. A pet beast. Seeing the star beast on Yang Tian's shoulder, many people suddenly realized that Yang Tian wasn't arrogant. It was because he had a pet beast. A cultivator with a pet beast would have the support of the pet beast in battle. It wasn't as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. However, even if he had a pet beast, would he be able to defeat the combined attack of 3 people? After seeing that Yang Tian had a pet beast, Neri was stunned for a moment before he sneered and said, You want to challenge all 3 of us at once? You're not qualified. Those who were familiar with Yang Tian knew that Yang Tian had a pet beast. Those who didn't know that Yang Tian had a pet beast didn't notice the little blue dragon because Yang Tian and the little blue dragon's auras were almost merged into one. At the same time, when they weren't unleashing their power, the energy fluctuations emitted by Yang Tian and the little blue dragon weren't strong. This would cause others to underestimate their combat strength. Under normal circumstances, the stronger and sharper the energy fluctuations emitted by a cultivator, the stronger their combat strength would be. Of course, this also depended on the person's aura. This was because cultivators who were strong and often defeated others would display an extremely confident aura. Neri's disdain angered the little blue dragon. It immediately jumped down from Yang Tian's shoulder and landed on the ground. In a few blinks of an eye, it transformed into a giant dragon that was almost 30 meters long. When the little blue dragon was small, it gave off a very cute feeling. However, after transforming into a giant dragon, it gave off a strong sense of oppression. At this moment, the little blue dragon also emitted powerful energy fluctuations. Judging from the energy fluctuations of the little blue dragon, its combat strength was at least equivalent to a superstar warrior rank cultivator. At this time, if he didn't show his strength to these people, they would really look down on him. Yang Tian's body suddenly emitted strong energy fluctuations. The origin power of the origin realm gushed out and filled Yang Tian's body, causing Yang Tian's aura to soar. Yang Tian was a superstar warrior level cultivator, but he gave off a strong sense of oppression just by standing there. What a powerful foundation! When Yang Tian's body emitted powerful energy fluctuations, one of the high priests could not help but exclaim, "Foundation," which also meant that he had a deep foundation. This showed that Yang Tian's strength was very strong and of high quality. Usually, cultivators with strong foundations were the best among their peers. Some could even fight above their level. Clearly, Yang Tian was such a cultivator. When Yang Tian unleashed his power, some people realized that they had underestimated Yang Tian. Then there was the little blue dragon. This star beast was the same as Yang Tian. When it was small, it was hard to imagine that it had such great strength. Looking at Yang Tian and the little blue dragon, Neri and the other two modified cultivators were no longer as confident as they had been before. The three of them hesitated. They were finally seriously considering Yang Tian's suggestion. Should they attack together? Just as the three modified cultivators were hesitating, High Priest Empty God suddenly said, "The three of you can attack together." Now that High Priest Empty God had spoken, the three of them finally had a way out. However, Neri still said stubbornly, "Since you want to die, don't blame us." Yang Tian was not angry at these words at all. He understood the mentality of these three people. They were just like nouveau riche, overconfident. Neri, Qiao Bei, and Yas quickly stood in a row, a few meters away from each other, facing Yang Tian and the little blue dragon. The battle was about to begin. Clearly, it was a battle of life and death. The observatory became silent again. Even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. Roar! The little azure dragon suddenly raised its head and let out a roar. It raised one of its front paws and slammed it on the star observation platform. With a loud bang, the entire star observation platform shook a little. If it was not for the protection of the glyph formation, the little blue dragon's claw would have probably cracked the observatory. This was also a way for the little blue dragon to show off its great strength. Seeing that the three of them were about to attack, Yang Tian immediately whispered to the little blue dragon, "Xiaolong, kill them as fast as you can." The little blue dragon nodded its huge head, indicating that it understood. Yang Tian had used his spiritual power to say this. Other than the little blue dragon, no one else should be able to hear it. They all knew each other's names and their current realms. There was no need to report their names and realms. Neri was the most impatient, and he suddenly moved. There was a distance of about 200 meters between them. For a superstar realm cultivator, it would only take an instant to cross such a distance. Neri's figure flashed, and he appeared 10 meters in front of the little azure dragon in an instant. He punched towards the little azure dragon's head from a distance. With Yang Tian's current combat strength, he was not even a match for the little blue dragon. When they were training in the gravity room, he was always beaten up by the little blue dragon, let alone Neri, who was not as good as Yang Tian. In the face of Neri's punch, the little azure dragon didn't move at all. In that instant, it looked like a mighty statue. Boom! The invisible force from Neri's fist condensed into a ball and landed on the little blue dragon's forehead. The loud noise was the sound of two forces colliding. Neri's fist force and the little blue dragon's protective force. The shockwave from the collision of the two forces forced Neri, who was in the air, to fly away. At this time, the little blue dragon suddenly moved. Before Neri could land, the little blue dragon raised its upper body and slapped at Neri with one of its claws. Boom! Another loud sound was heard. The entire observatory trembled once again. At this time, everyone was once again shocked. Because Neri could not escape from the little blue dragon's giant claw, he was slapped into the stone slab of the observatory by the little blue dragon. The ground of the observatory was also protected by a talisman array. How much power would it take to slap a person into the ground? Roar! The little blue dragon did not immediately let go of its claw. Instead, it raised its head and let out a roar of victory. Under the cover of the talisman array's energy, the little blue dragon's voice was as loud as thunder. Huh! After the little blue dragon's voice faded away, Yang Tian laughed and said to the little blue dragon, "Xiaolong, well done." The little blue dragon raised its head proudly, and only then did it move its claw that had sunk into the ground. At this time, everyone could see that in the middle of the dragon claw mark, Neri had already turned into a thick blood-red meat paste. Just like that, Neri was slapped to death by the little blue dragon's claw. What was even more shocking was that Neri, who was slapped to death by the little blue dragon, did not show any signs of reforming his body. His life force had also completely disappeared. Only Yang Tian, Soli, Chu Yin, and Guing knew that the little blue dragon also had the same force as Yang Tian. Chapter 494. Neri was killed so easily by the little blue dragon. This result was hard for Chopper and Yas, who were also modified cultivators, to accept. They had great power, and this power was very special. After invading someone's body, they could stop the cells from dividing. They saw the situation clearly just now and didn't understand why Neri didn't dodge. What they didn't know was that it wasn't that Neri didn't want to dodge, but that he was trapped. Yang Tian had a deep understanding of this. When he fought with the little blue dragon in the gravity room, the little blue dragon often used its powerful spiritual power to trap him and limit his speed. Then, he would be sent flying by the little blue dragon's claw. Of course, when he fought with Yang Tian, the little blue dragon didn't use its full strength. This time, it used its fastest speed and strongest power to kill Neri in one blow. If Neri had experienced a battle like this with the little blue dragon, he probably wouldn't have been killed in one blow by the little blue dragon. As the saying went, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. This was the principle. Of course, another reason was that Neri was too confident. Gaining great power in a short period of time made him a little arrogant. At the same time, he didn't have the rich battle experience of superstar cultivators. The lack of battle experience of modified cultivators was also a big problem. Isn't that pet beast a little too powerful? It killed Neri in one blow. No wonder Yang Tian was so confident. Yeah, with such a powerful pet beast, his combat strength will increase several times. There's going to be a good show to watch. I wonder if Chopped Bay and Yasi will admit defeat. The cultivators on the observatory began to discuss, forming a buzzing sound. Chopper and Yas glanced at each other, conveying their worry and fear to each other. Yang Tian's pet beast was so powerful, and with Yang Tian's unknown background, they had no chance of winning at all. Yang Tian, didn't you want to prove that you can still have great power without modification? Using your pet beast to defeat them isn't what you want, is it? Suddenly, the middle-aged priest said, "All right." Yang Tian smiled and said, "I will prove it to you and everyone else." After saying that, Yang Tian smiled at the little blue dragon and said, "Xiaolong, it's my turn now." The little blue dragon nodded and quickly turned back into a mini dragon. It then flew into Qin Fei's arms. "Xiaolong, you're awesome." Qin Fei pointed at the little blue dragon's head and said with a smile. The little blue dragon's eyes were filled with pride. With the little blue dragon no longer participating in the battle, Chopper and Yas regained their confidence in defeating Yang Tian. Neri's crushing defeat made Chopper and Yas cautious. Even though the little blue dragon was no longer participating in the battle, they no longer arrogantly proposed to fight Yang Tian alone. Therefore, the two of them attacked Yang Tian together. This was Yang Tian's request. The observatory became silent again. Everyone's eyes were focused on the three of them again, as well as the huge dragon claw mark on the ground between them. Time slowly passed by for more than 2 minutes. Chopper and Yas looked at each other and suddenly moved. They rushed toward Yang Tian together. The moment the two of them moved, weapons could be seen in their hands. There was no prohibition against using weapons in this kind of battle. They didn't violate the rules. Chopper and Yas, as well as Neri, who was killed by the little blue dragon, had just advanced to the superstar realm, but their speed surpassed that of ordinary superstar warriors. Although the three of them didn't have much experience fighting superstar cultivators before this, they had undergone a short period of training. Facing the two of them rushing toward him, Yang Tian narrowed his eyes slightly. Powerful mental power burst out and formed a mental energy domain in front of him. This was also a method that Yang Tian came up with based on the battle process of the little blue dragon killing Neri. In an instant, Chopper and Yas rushed into the domain formed by Yang Tian's mental power. At the same time, Yang Tian also felt two powerful forces trying to break free from his restraints. At this moment, it was obvious that Chopper and Yas slowed down a lot. At this moment, Yang Tian, who had expected this, appeared in front of them. In that split second, Chopper and Yas felt as if they had been sucked into a thick liquid from the air. The feeling of being able to move swiftly in the air was gone in an instant. What shocked the two of them was that Yang Tian was not affected at all. He was at least twice as fast as them and suddenly appeared in front of them. His two palms were aimed at their chests. Mental power. The two of them immediately understood that Yang Tian actually had mental power, and it was very powerful. In that case, Neri was easily killed by that star beast earlier because he was bound by mental power. Seeing that they were about to be hit by Yang Tian, the two of them also burst out with their most powerful strength and stomped hard on the ground. At this critical moment, they hoped to break free from the restraints of Yang Tian's mental power. Their movements seemed to be in slow motion in Yang Tian's eyes. When they stomped on the ground and began to exert force, Yang Tian withdrew his mental power. Bang! When Yang Tian withdrew his mental power, the two of them suddenly sped up and crashed into Yang Tian's hands. At this moment, Yang Tian was already prepared for the collision. He leaned forward and put his feet in front and behind. Under the powerful collision, Yang Tian did not move at all, while the bodies of Chopper and Yas bounced back. When Chopper and Yas turned over and landed on the ground and stood firm, everyone saw that the chest area of their black armor had been completely shattered. Yang Tian's palm strength directly shattered the armor on their bodies. What was even more shocking was that after the two of them stood firm, their expressions and bodies suddenly stiffened. Clap, clap, clap. Yang Tian heaved a sigh of relief and clapped his hands, brushing off the armor powder on his hands. With this action, Yang Tian also concealed the trembling of his arms. His arm had also been injured by the shock from the attack just now. However, this price was worth it because he had achieved his goal, which was to kill the two of them in one blow, just like the little blue dragon. Yang Tian, who was clapping his hands, immediately attracted everyone's attention. At this moment, Yang Tian smiled and said, "Who said that traditional cultivation is inferior to reformation?" Everyone saw it, right? Bang! Bang! As soon as Yang Tian finished speaking, Chopper and Yas both fell to the ground. No, it should be said that they were two corpses. Like Neri, their bodies also began to melt at this moment. Yang Tian also verified that his origin power had a powerful destructive power when it came to reforming the bodies of cultivators. The three reformed cultivators were killed. Many high priests looked at Yang Tian with dissatisfaction. However, they could not blame Yang Tian because the entire process was fair. They did not stop him before. If Yang Tian's combat strength was inferior to the three of them, Yang Tian would be the one to die. Chapter 495. Yang Tian was not a modified cultivator, but he had easily defeated a modified cultivator. This also proved that traditional cultivators could also easily defeat modified cultivators who had rapidly increased their realm and possessed strange powers. Modification was simply a way to increase one's realm. This gave many people great confidence. During the battle, the flaws of modified cultivators were also exposed, which was their lack of actual combat experience. Also, in terms of psychological quality, they were not as good as traditional cultivators. Although they were powerful, under special circumstances, they lacked the ability to adapt and were easily arrogant. After Yang Tian killed Qiao Bei and Yasi, the entire observatory suddenly became lively again. Everyone was discussing the battle between Yang Tian and the two modified cultivators. Compared to the battle between the modified cultivators and the traditional cultivators, they were discussing which one had the advantage. This was also what Yang Tian wanted to see, although he knew that what he had just done was useless. Hearing these discussions, Yang Tian was rather pleased. At least he had helped many traditional cultivators regain their confidence and expose the flaws of the modified cultivators. Seeing this, Great Priest Empty God waved his sleeves and snorted coldly before turning to leave the observatory. It was unknown whether he was angry at Yang Tian, blaming Yang Tian for disrupting the situation, or disappointed in the modified cultivators. After Great Priest Empty God left, many other great priests also left with him. Since the great priests had left, there was no point in staying any longer, so everyone dispersed. Qin Fei originally wanted to stay and talk to Yang Tian, but Hong Yujio persuaded her to leave the observatory. Seeing Qin Fei leave the observatory surrounded by a group of white-robed maids, Yang Tian gritted his teeth and thought to himself, "This old man Hong Yujio is really too despicable." The little blue dragon returned to Yang Tian's shoulder. Yang Tian patted the little blue dragon's head and sighed helplessly before walking down the observatory. Then, Yang Tian returned to the Great Universe Palace. What Yang Tian didn't know was that he had already been noticed by a great shaman. This high priest was High Priest Mei Chun, who majored in spiritual power. High Priest Mei Chun came from the music boundary starfield, so his mental power came from the same source as Chu Yin and Gu Ying. Naturally, he could tell that Yang Tian's mental power came from the same source as his. However, what made High Priest Mei Chun feel strange was that there was no mental power world in Yang Tian's body. When Yang Tian was using his mental power, High Priest Mei Chun used his special ability to observe Yang Tian's mental power world. However, he did not expect that there was no mental power world in Yang Tian's body. In other words, Yang Tian's body did not have a world of pure mental power. In terms of mental power cultivation, High Priest Mei Chun was undoubtedly the authority in this universe. He was experienced and knowledgeable in mental power cultivation, but he had never seen a situation like Yang Tian's. Yang Tian was now in the Great Universe Palace. If you want to know about Yang Tian's situation, he would need High Priest Taiyu's permission. After all, Yang Tian was a member of the Great Universe Palace and a subordinate of High Priest Taiyu. For example, if High Priest Taiyu wanted to ask for someone from Mei Chen's palace, he would need High Priest Mei Chen's permission. This was what the humans on Earth used to say, "Look at the owner before beating a dog." Although it sounded unpleasant, it was the truth. Therefore, after leaving the observatory, High Priest Mei Chun found High Priest Taiyu and appeared in front of him. High Priest Mei Chun was slightly older than High Priest Taiyu. He appeared in front of High Priest Taiyu and directly said, "Taiyu, I want to know about Yang Tian's situation." High Priest Mei Chun and High Priest Taiyu were the kind of people who didn't like to talk in the Superstar Divinity Temple. This was because they were technical cultivators and their profession had shaped their personalities. In other words, it was because of this personality that they were able to cultivate powers that others found difficult to cultivate. High Priest Mei Chun stopped High Priest Taiyu, which was strange. Many high priests stopped in their tracks and looked at the two of them curiously. High Priest Taiyu glanced around and said indifferently, "It's not convenient to talk here." The two of them felt very uncomfortable being stared at by so many people. This was their personality. High Priest Mei Chun glanced to the side and frowned. "Since it's not convenient to talk here, let's go to my Mei Chun palace." High Priest Taiyu hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he nodded to High Priest Mei Chun. Although the high priests had their own palaces in the Superstar Divinity Temple, they rarely interacted with each other. For example, High Priest Taiyu and High Priest Mei Chun. It had to be said that this was the first time High Priest Taiyu had come to High Priest Mei Chun's Mei Chun Palace. Like High Priest Taiyu's Great Universe Palace, Mei Chun Palace was very cold and cheerless. It was even quieter than Great Universe Palace. This was because cultivating mind power required a very quiet environment. High Priest Mei Chun led High Priest Taiyu to a quiet room. After the two of them sat down facing each other, High Priest Mei Chun said bluntly, "I would like to see Yang Tian. It might take a few days." High Priest Taiyu frowned as soon as High Priest Mei Chun said this. What does this old man want? High Priest Taiyu thought for a moment and suddenly realized that it had something to do with Yang Tian's mind power. Yang Tian was now a member of Great Universe Palace. If High Priest Mei Chun wanted to see Yang Tian, he would need High Priest Taiyu's permission. All right. High Priest Taiyu thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. The two old men then began to talk about the situation outside the Superstar Divinity Temple. Although the three modified cultivators had been easily killed by Yang Tian and the little blue dragon, many people still applied the next day when the Superstar Divinity Temple announced that cultivators in the temple could apply for modifications. The place to be modified was Builder's Palace. The usually quiet builder's palace was suddenly filled with thousands of cultivators. The first batch to be selected were 100 cultivators who had reached the transcendental realm. The cost of creating protocells was very high. Among the first batch of applicants, the super rank cultivators were given priority to be modified and raised to the level of a major star lord. After the 100 people entered Builder's Palace, only 31 came out. The higher the rank, the higher the success rate. It was about a third. If it was a major star lord, the success rate would be more than 50%. As for a major star god, the success rate should be more than 70%. Yang Tian naturally knew about what had happened in Builder's Palace. Even many people in Great Universe Palace couldn't help but sign up. Unfortunately, only one person was selected. That person was a super rank cultivator. He was very lucky, and the modification was successful. When he came back from Builder's Palace, he was already a major star lord, which made many people envious. Yang Tian wasn't interested in such things at all. What had happened the day before had basically made him draw a line between himself and modification. Even if he were thick-skinned enough to sign up, he wouldn't be selected. He knew that increasing one's rank at an extremely fast speed would definitely have side effects. It wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Perhaps it wouldn't take long for the side effects to appear. By then, it would be too late for regrets for the cultivators who had undergone the transformation. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.